Ryu's jaw clenched tighter and tighter, the more words manhwa spoke. He didn't realize it, but even his halberd was quaking under his grip. A war erupted, if one could even call it that. The Tatsuya clan was continuously backstabbed. It seemed there would be a new traitor every other day. Manhwa grit her teeth. Those martial plane bastards claimed that their approach for the human race was far better, that their path of absolute strength was the only way for us to survive, yet they shamelessly used underhanded tricks and schemes to eke out victory. Ryu's breathing turned erratic. His face, one that seemed carved of the purest ice, reddened with rage. His father's whereabouts were completely unknown. He couldn't imagine what his mother had to face without her husband by her side. The more he heard, the more and more difficult it was for him to forgive his great-grandfather. However, Ryu knew that such thoughts were useless. He had committed suicide precisely because he could feel the tides of their fates shifting. He knew that if he didn't grasp strength for himself, his Tatsuya clan was doomed. At the same time, though, he knew he also made mistakes. Was it unwise of him to not speak of these matters with his parents first? Maybe if he had told them his thought process, they would have been more prepared for the coming war. Ryu knew why he hadn't said a word. If he had, it was very likely that his parents would have tried to stop him. It may have seemed cruel that he killed himself within his and Alina's wedding chambers, but that was the only place he could guarantee that Nuri wouldn't be in position to stop him. It was the only place she didn't keep her eyes on him at all times. On the one hand, he had to keep these matters a secret so that he could actually execute them, but on the other, his silence might have made the situation worse than it potentially could have been. With the resources of the Tatsuya clan, as long as they were preemptive, even fleeing to another realm wasn't impossible. The measures they could have taken were practically endless. I believed in our absolute strength too much. Ryu's eyes sealed shut. It was almost as though he didn't register that he was still in battle. Ryu took such actions because he believed that his Tatsuya clan would survive until the time he made his way back, even if it was barely. But he was wrong. After his death, they didn't last. Nothing could last forever, even if that thing was a clan that stood atop the shrine plain for so long. Young master, I really do not know much more. Although us subordinate clans were conscripted to battle, the underhanded schemes of the martial plane resulted in wars of our own being fought on the Blossom Plain. Let alone help the Tatsuya clan, the sect fell to the 8th order under my watch. It's likely become far worse by now. Ryu remained silent. If he told Manhwa that her treasured sect was now of the mere 5th order, only worthy to share the outer ring of the pedestal plane with other middling sects, he didn't know how she would react. There are only 2 remaining things that are of great importance that I have left to tell you. Having tacitly understood Ryu's silence, Manhwa continued. The first is that the shrine plain is now sealed. It wasn't by a fluke, but rather by Mistress Tatsuya unlocking the potential of the ice shrine. Much of the plain is currently frozen over completely. Her actions forced those martial plane bastards to retreat. As they were unable to break through the seal, they could only bide their time. The so-called martial plane isn't actually a new plane at all. It's only the parts of the shrine plane that haven't been sealed. Manhwa shook in anger at their shamelessness. They want to portray to the world that they are mighty martial gods, so they claim to have created a new plane. But you know as well as I how impossible that is. With Shrine Mountain overseeing the balance of our realm, the creation of a new plane is impossible for such weak cowards. They wove a story about young masters Tatsuya clan sealing themselves away in fear, and allowed it to permeate through our realm. They hoped to slowly whittle away our faith and eventually eradicate what remains of their opposition. Manhwa struck forward with her spear once more, pushing Ryu back again. The final thing of importance that I have to tell young master is related to young Mistress Alina. Ryu felt his heart seize at these words, his bloody arm bulging all the more. There was no word of Miss Alina after young master's death. I know that master and mistress wouldn't have allowed her to be taken away, so it must be another underhanded scheme of the Holy Wing clan. Young master should know that the center of all of these matters wasn't the Holy Wing clan, but instead, another race of people who call themselves martial gods despite being the cowards they are. As young master knows, Miss Alina's father has always been unknown. The thumping of Ryu's heart grew erratic. The fire dragon blood coursing through his veins grew so violent that the thrumming of his heart resonated through the castle of ice. Ryu understood. The saintess of the light shrine during Ryu's first life was actually a woman that was technically Ryu's grand aunt. The reason Ryu's grandma Kunan hated Mistress Holy Wing, Alina's grandmother, so much was because she drugged Ryu's grandpa with an aphrodisiac which led to the birth of Ryu's grand aunt. However, Mistress Holy Wing had another daughter, one she birthed from an unknown man. This daughter was Alina's mother. But what was truly baffling was that not only was the man Mistress Holy Wing bedded to birth this daughter unknown, so was the man Alina's mother bedded to birth her. This was completely different from the way the Holy Wing clan usually did things. They would usually parade around the mates they chose as a method of increasing their faith. After all, their partners were usually chosen from great clans, so forming relationships with these men would only bring benefits. But for some reason, they remained silent about these matters not just once, but twice. Young master, I died before I could learn the truth, but I think young master should be mindful of this relationship. Just like young master is a focal point of the tides of faith, so is Mistress Alina. Ryu was no longer listening. The so-called cold of his ice silk flexible armor had given way to an oppressive heat. The crackles of abyssal flames, the caliber of which could only be bred from a dragon of fire, surged through the ice castle. Grand ancestral bloodlines, rapidly heating and cooling air, whipped around Ryu. It wasn't as though he had suddenly comprehended some flame-natural order. Rather, his blood was simply running that hot. His white hair steamed, flying outward through the volatile wind. His skin reddened, the pumping of his veins and the thumping of his heart grating on the psyches of all those who watched. Even Manhwa, a mighty ninth-order ancestor, felt her heart palpitate unwillingly as a deep fear took root. She wondered if she had gone too far, if maybe the young master thought that she was insinuating that his fiancé betrayed his parents and him. She wanted to quickly explain herself, to say that that wasn't what she meant, but Ryu's words cut her off. Thank you for your words, Ancestor Manhwa. You've always been kind to me, but the only way I can repay you is by striking you down. Manhwa's eyes widened. She hadn't thought that the young master knew her name. Despite the vast age difference between them, the scion of Shrine Plain Clan, a Shrine Plain clan that stood even above others, a mighty 11th Order clan, was simply worlds above her. The fact he knew her name touched her in more ways words could express. Ryu's blood boiled. Although his ice jade crystal body perfectly balanced his bloodlines, it could never change Ryu's strongest affinity. The reality was that Ryu had a natural sense for ice and lightning. Even an elemental fairy would bow their hands down in worship toward. But Ryu's affinity for fire was on a completely different level. The ancestral beasts once ruled this realm, but none were stronger in the path of fire than the fire dragon and the fire phoenix. Yet, both of their bloodlines were within Ryu's body. For the first time during this trial, Ryu's second hand touched the shaft of his weapon. Boom! A violent aura flashed outward, rings of red gold rampaging through the air. It seemed like if for but a moment, Ryu's hair was no longer a pure white, but instead the striking red of his father and grandfather. Ailsa's red eyes glowed. The phenomena formed from Ryu's spear and glaive could be allowed to appear if it was truly necessary. Even the phenomena of the northern wind was just fine. But the one phenomena that couldn't be allowed to appear was that of the dragon god. A mighty roar shook the castle of ice, freezing Manhwa in place. She couldn't see the phenomena, but she could feel it. A majestic beast the likes of which hadn't appeared in countless epochs. It bore into her soul that basal, bestial desire for slaughter, an emperor of all things that sat in the skies, bearing down judgment as he saw fit. A bloody aura spiraled around Ryu, his silver eyes shifting to hold a distinct gold tint. It shouldn't be forgotten. Ryu's karmic Kai was spent. His neutral Kai was dried up. His mental realm was sustaining great pressure after being continuously depleted and replenished by Ailsa. All of these things were true. Yet, the power of the halberd exuded such a pressure that none of that seemed to matter. Ailsa immediately took advantage of the rampaging red-gold essence. She had never seen a mere air-grade natural order call down so much, but she had been prepared from the very beginning. Ryu's screaming meridians were suddenly filled with Kai, as Ailsa nurtured him back to full health. He even felt that his pupils were once more brimming with power. It was only now Ryu truly understood the strength of a cultist sprite. Calling down essence using his birthed phenomena was one thing, but converting that essence into his own strength beyond the strikes of his halberd was impossible. No one was capable of such a feat. Essence was the highest grade energy of the heavens and moved as it pleased. You couldn't manipulate it just because you felt like it, and definitely not with such ease. The only reason Ryu could cultivate on the immortal path was precisely because that essence was primed to reward those worthy. However, the essence called down by a birthed phenomena was meant to be used by the birthed phenomena, and the birthed phenomena alone. One shouldn't be able to take essence meant to form halberd Kai and suddenly turn it to another form. However, Ailsa could. Manhwa was struck down. The elders thought they were hallucinating. They could have sworn they saw a smile on their ancestor's face. What they could have never guessed was that a smile truly was there. It was a smile that could only be formed by an elder passing down a torch. The battles Ryu continued to fight became a blur. None of the elders knew why, though they had their own guesses. But Ryu put away his halberd after Manhwa's trial was passed. He continued to push himself, using their ancestors as training dummies. The reality of the matter made the elders slightly bitter, yet happy at the same time. They really would have a throne. How exciting. The ninth order ancestors fell one after another. Even after a middle spiritual severing realm expert appeared, Ryu's tactics shifted. A beautiful sakura tree appeared above his head, as a strong, 2-meter-tall bow appeared in his hand. It was a beautiful scene, akin to a light snowfall acting as the backdrop of a great battle. But the elders couldn't help but feel that Ryu was using their ancestor for target practice. Also, why were his arrows so powerful? And why did his speed have to be so mind-numbing? If he fought like this from the beginning, it couldn't be helped. Before, the arrows Ryu formed with the glove of order were already capable of killing a lower fourth-order beast with a single strike. And that was back when his arrows were only formed by the combination of spear, glaive, and halberd Kai. Now, Ryu had learned a fourth Kai thanks to his northern heavenly wind. The power had shot up exponentially. Still, Ryu began to slowly learn how to control the glove of order under Ailsa's guidance. He learned that he didn't have to go all out constantly. If he did, he would drain his spiritual Kai too quickly. Instead, he learned to tap into one Kai at a time, and even learned how to change the balance of Kai. By the time Ryu noticed that using wind Kai alone made his arrows far quicker than he could have ever imagined, the final pitiful ninth order ancestor, who stood as the most powerful in their sex history, was already a pincushion. There was no doubt. The third throne of the pedestal plane had appeared. Grand ancestral bloodlines, Ryu walked out of the portal in tatters. His black robes, as expected, were shredded to pieces. Only the semblance of sleeves remained, while his lower half was a smorgasbord of tears and holes. If it wasn't for his relatively intact ice silk flexibly armor, Ryu might have been bearing too much for female eyes. Though his back was just as tall and straight as when he entered, the fatigue was clear in his eyes. The elders didn't notice because they were too enraptured by his performance. But 4 days had passed since Ryu entered the trial realm. The fact he had held himself together for so long wasn't something the elders would be impressed by, until they noticed this striking detail they had missed. Suddenly, a strong weng-weng sound rung through the awoken moon sect. No, it was safe to say that Everyone within Valor City's territory heard it clearly. A golden light enveloped Ryu's body, gently healing his accumulated injuries. A throne was in existence that stood above even the castle master. The reason was simple. Even a castle master could never accumulate as much faith as Ryu could for their sect. This was the reality of the throne. They were meant to loners, shouldering the weight of their future as well as the futures of those who stood below the throne they claimed. Ryu was perfectly ready to receive nothing for his days of effort. After all, shouldn't having unlimited access to the resources of the sect be enough? And that much was true. To anyone else, there would be no further reward. Aside from his actions being tied to the faith of the sect, nothing else should have happened. That was why Ryu was so shocked when he felt his pupils begin to heat. And he was even more shocked when a familiar popping noise resonated. Ailsa. Ryu was confused. He called out to Ailsa, asking for her opinion. Ho ho, little Ryu is asking for my help. I must mark the date. Ailsa clapped happily. You just released the second of the 999 seals. But why? It seems that your pupils respond very well to karmic energy. Just now, your karma was tied to this sect. In all likelihood, when you completed your rite of origin, resulting in the first seal being undone, you barely fell short of the momentum needed to undo the second seal. The surge of karma just now knocked the already loosened seal completely open. Is there a difference between karmic energy and karmic kai? Ailsa would be lying if she said she wasn't surprised. Though she had felt Ryu's intentions shifting slightly after her piercing speech and the matters with the Ember Clan father-son duo, she hadn't expected him to do this complete 180. He was relying on her. Of course, Ailsa also knew that this was in large part due to the matter Ryu just learned of. He had already been pushed to knock his own pride down a notch. But after hearing what happened after his death, it seemed a single notch was no longer enough to explain it. Their intimacy didn't rise. This much was obvious. After all, it wasn't because Ryu trusted Ailsa more that he was acting like this. It was rather because his sense of urgency had raised substantially. Despite this, Ailsa couldn't turn his earnestness down. He was the one person she couldn't say no to. Yes and no, Ailsa responded. In reality, there's no difference between energy and kai. They're simply two different words used to describe the same thing. However, what I was referring to changed in this context. I simply used a new term so that you wouldn't be confused, but kept the terms familiar at the same time for the same reason. This karmic energy I was referring to is an intangible thing tied to faith, while your karmic kai exists. It can be manipulated and collected. Karmic energy exists in the ethereal. Only a rare few can see its movement, including you thanks to your heavenly pupils. Karmic kai is just a throwaway name. I gave your cool kai for simplicity's sake. Simply put, karmic energy is what constructs those lines of fate you can see when you activate your karmic kai. I see. Thank you for the explanation. Ryu was silently communicating with Ailsa, completely oblivious to the stares of the elders around him as he basked in golden light. So is this the path I have to take to release the remainder of my seals? It's a start, but it isn't the full picture. Your pupils also responded well to Origin Kai. It's possible that it would respond well to all high forms of energy. Other heavenly pupils are restricted in this sense. For example, the 8th ranked fire pupils can only absorb high-quality yang kai, but the 2nd ranked world pupils don't have kai-type restrictions. It only seeks quality. Your pupils may be similar. After all, karmic energy technically makes up everything in existence. Having restrictions doesn't make much sense. Ryu nodded in acknowledgement. Finally, his eyes opened, their piercing glow sinking into the castle master that sat just several meters ahead of him. Castle Master Toria smiled down at Ryu gently. Congratulations, Throne Ryu. The doors of my awoken moon sect will be open to you fully. Whether it be our resources or our core teachings, we will hold nothing back. I wonder if you have any immediate requests. I would like to enter the moon world. Ryu spoke without hesitation. Toria's pupils constricted, her gaze inadvertently scanning across the elders. This young man sure seemed very familiar with something he should know nothing about. I'm sorry if I've mentioned something I shouldn't, but one of the perks of being a throne is learning much of the secrets of the sect. This is so that, Ryu began to explain, so it's like this. Toria waved Ryu off. This system was obviously put in place so that sects couldn't take advantage of thrones by hiding resources. It's not something well known even amongst our elders, but I'm sure you understand the past of our sect now. So you should understand that the moon world isn't a mere small realm. It's a portal to a true realm, no different from the realm we're in right now in substance and reality. The only reason we've been able to protect our path to the moon realm all this time is thanks to this. Toria raised her blue marble ring. It's protected by the faith of our ancestors, so our enemies cannot take it. The issue is that though the portal remains ours, we no longer have the necessary resources to open it. Ryu could swear he saw Toria, the mighty ice ghost of the battlefield, blush in shame. Grand ancestral bloodlines, Ryu sighed. He had thought this might happen, but hearing it outright still dampened his mood. If he could enter the moon realm now, his speed of cultivation was increase explosively, especially with xianxia by his side. The moon realm was a special realm that gave rise to the awoken moon sect's namesake. According to their history, something Ryu was very familiar with as he researched the moon realm for his mother. The founding members of the sect were the beneficiaries of a fragment of a legacy from that realm. As Toria had said, the moon realm was no different from this realm. Though it only had one plane and not multiple, still it was a holy land for yin path cultivation. Ryu knew that he had many other affinities besides ice, namely the flames he had yet to awaken. But the awoken moon sect was the only of his former subordinate clans that he could easily gain access to now. The others had either already been destroyed, were too weak to be of any help to him, or were currently still holding on too strongly for Ryu to reach them in a short time. Unfortunately, the moon realm that Ryu had banked on was blocked from him. How could it be easy to cross over into another realm? Luckily, Ryu wasn't completely unprepared. According to the information I've received, entering the moon world during a lunar eclipse will drastically cut down the resources needed. Correct. I would like to enter then. The next eclipse will be in 2 years, I believe. You are correct. Toria's eyes widened with surprise once more. Could the passing the throne trial truly have given him so much information? For a single Kai Refinum, it might be best if you do the calculation for a spiritual severing realm expert. Ryu interjected plainly. Understanding what Ryu's words insinuated, the elders almost protested in shock. But remembering that Ryu had just defeated several experts of that caliber before their eyes, they could only remain silent in defeat. Just who was this boy? Where did he come from, really? In that case, Toria continued with a gentle smile. It will take 10 medial immortal Kai stones. If you suppress your cultivation instead, it will be 100 inferior immortal Kai stones. Choose wisely. The sect might be able to help you gather inferior immortal Kai stones, but medial ones are impossible for us. I understand. Ryu nodded, but he had no intention of slowing his cultivation. If he couldn't reach the spiritual severing realm in that time, it would be fine. But he wouldn't hold himself back either. Currently, Ryu had 3 inferior immortal Kai stones he took from Leopold. As for medial immortal Kai stones, they were worth 1,000 inferior ones. It was a tall task for someone of Ryu's cultivation to collect such a sum, but this perfectly highlighted his stubbornness. Asterisk asterisk, this will be your home as long as you remain within our walls. Heiress Melody explained with a calm voice. There technically isn't a place where you're barred from entering, but I hope that Yao'll respect the privacy of our disciples. After all, they're not used to having men around. Ryu silently gazed at the side of Melody's face. It was hard to internalize that she was in fact Granny Miriam's twin sister, considering how young she looked. But this was the reality of cultivation. it was also a reality that Ryu had never been faced with. He didn't know what it must feel like to watch everyone you loved age and die around you as you remained forever young. The place the two of them stood was quite beautiful, albeit extremely cold for normal cultivators. According to Melody, it was a place reserved for inheritors of the sect. Usually, there would be multiple inheritors per generation, and in the end, one would be chosen as sect master. But as the sect declined, it had become more and more difficult to find qualified candidates, though according to some rumors, the young, foul-mouthed Amy might one day grow worthy. The sect was arranged within a snowy mountain landscape, with the gates being located at the base of these numerous mountains. An inheritor was allowed to choose a mountain of their own, so obviously, Ryu also received this same privilege. The air was filled with dense yin kai that made such cultivation incredibly fast as well. But Ryu's actual home to be was carved into the mountain itself. Due to what must have been the actions of a previous inheritor, it was designed with the air of a luxurious mansion, though Ryu didn't care much for appearances. Ryu began, but Melody's words cut him off. There's no need to explain. My elder sister's memories are my own now. It's both the blessing and curse of our bone structure. Melody stared off blankly into the quiet cave mansion. Sometimes I think the heavens played a game with my sister and I. Ryu remained silent. He couldn't begin to comprehend how Melody was feeling. The causal gate bone structure. It really did seem like it only existed for fate to play games with people's lives, tying the fate of two people, making a pair of sisters' talents contingent on the failure of the other. How cruel was that? All my life I've wanted to escape, to become a mighty cultivator. I didn't particularly have a reason. Our family was quite well off on the middle mortal plane. We lived well. With my sister's talent, it was even enough for us to be unmatched. We could have lived a life of leisure, but I insisted. The frustration in Melody's voice was clear. When a being learns about themselves, about what they like and what they don't like, about what their disposition is, it's usually seen as a beautiful thing. Self-care, self-reflection, self-understanding, they are the staples of maturity, of a person who has a grip on their own lives. Isn't that right? So why was it that Melody hated herself for simply following that path toward maturity? She knew what she wanted and she sought after it, she chased it. Shouldn't that make her hold her head high? But what if getting closer to your dreams, becoming powerful, accumulating more talent, was all at the expense of the person you loved most in this world? As Miriam grew weaker, Melody grew incomprehensibly stronger, and when Miriam died, Melody gained not only another major leap in strength, but also all the thoughts and emotions her elder sister had held tight for so long. Just why? Why did she want to become a strong cultivator? She didn't have a tragic story or a particular purpose. She just wanted it. Did fate choose that for her too? Was life just the illusion of choice? Was it fate that decided her sister would die just so that she could live her dream? Grand ancestral bloodlines. Ryu didn't have any words of comfort for Melody. He could only listen to her words and watch her silently leave. He himself didn't truly understand fate, so what was the point in responding with empty platitudes? There was none. Over the next few days, under Ailsa's orders, Ryu did nothing but rest. In truth, he was shocked by his own level of fatigue. He slept for almost 3 days the first time he closed his eyes, and awoke to find Ailsa in her full, more than 6-foot-tall form massaging him. Ryu had never felt more comfortable in his life, and that was including his life on the shrine plane. It was as though years of hidden hardships were being pulled from his body, as her soft hands glided across his toned back. This is my cultist clan's core martial art. Ailsa suddenly spoke into Ryu's mind, noticing that he had awoken. Though our healing abilities are severely lacking in comparison to Fisha sprites in battle or other practical situations, we aren't much inferior to them in calm situations such as this one. Ryu could sense that there was still a barrier between Ailsa's words and her thoughts, but there was nothing he could do about his own inner feelings. He couldn't accept Ailsa like he accepted Alina, just because she wanted him to. I can't stay in my true form for very long, At most about 10 minutes a day. I also don't have enough strength to complete the full martial art, but it should be enough for your current cultivation. A martial art was a technique that relied on nothing else but the natural abilities of the body. Theoretically, even a mortal who had never cultivated a day in their life could execute a martial art. But obviously, it wasn't that simple, or else Ailsa's strength wouldn't limit her ability to complete one. Ryu's martial forms fell under this category. Obviously, only those with the appropriate blood could perform Ryu's inherited martial forms. In the same way, the martial art of the cultist fairies could only be performed by cultist fairies. You're quite lucky, Ailsa said softly. I couldn't find you in your past life, so I suddenly gained 9 cycles of 100 million years of extra experience I wouldn't have had. My cultist martial art is far more refined than it had been in the past. I don't believe any Fisher fairy can outdo me in healing you now. The more Ailsa spoke, the more uncomfortable Ryu became. It was as though she was marketing herself. Ryu closed his eyes, a deep sigh reverberating from the depths of his soul. As long as you let me massage you like this every day, no matter how hard your training is, you'll wake up feeling fresh for the next hour. Suddenly, Ryu abruptly pushed himself up, startling Ailsa. The towel that had covered his decency fell, but Ryu hardly cared. He assumed that Ailsa had already seen it all anyway, since she was the only one who could have undressed him. Ailsa shrunk back a step, but Ryu's hands had already grabbed her shoulders. He scanned her ruby-red eyes. Even in her slight surprise and panic, Ailsa was truly one of the most beautiful women Ryu had ever seen. Everything from the small slope of her nose to her full pink lips could make a man's heart palpitate. But this wasn't what Ryu was paying attention to now. He wanted to understand. He wanted to know what had changed since the last time they spoke. What happened to the unflappable Ailsa? Why was she acting like this? Ailsa bit her bottom lip. They were so soft that even the faintest pressure left a line of red. I feel that I've been too harsh on you, Ailsa replied without Ryu having to speak. It's too much for me to expect someone who has only known one world to comprehend the worlds of everyone else. This is why cultist fairies and their life partners are paired from birth, so that they can grow together. But I expected a level of maturity from you that you have every right to not have yet. This is my mistake. Ryu's grip on Ailsa's shoulders tightened. It wasn't to an unbearable degree, but it was definitely enough to make her feel slightly uncomfortable. Her body was too weak outside the fairy world. No, Ryu spoke. I want you to continue pushing me in that way. You have nothing to apologize for. Ryu's grip loosened slightly. You've never spoken a word of falsehood. Everything you said is correct. Even if I couldn't accept them immediately, it doesn't mean I can't see this. I don't have the time to slowly mature, to become the man I want to be. I need you, Ailsa. Ailsa trembled slightly. Ryu smiled. It wasn't his normal smile that sent shivers down the spines of those who met it, but a genuine smile. He found that there was a deep revulsion within the depths of his heart. Whenever he tried to push Ailsa away, he knew that he was too inflexible. Who said that Ailsa needed to be his woman for them to have a close relationship? You know, Ryu said lightly, I once had a big sister who was a half-fairy. I'm not sure whether she's alive anymore or not, and I'm not saying I want you to replace her, but... Ailsa grinned wildly, the lost spark in her ruby eyes suddenly blazing to life once more. Her smile was so dazzling that Ryu felt his heart skip a beat. You better call me Big Sis from now on. I won't respond to any other form of address. Ryu's soul stirred. He suddenly felt that his connection with Ailsa had deepened considerably. Good. Ailsa's small hands clasped Ryu's cheeks. I can see a path forward now. Listen to Big Sis well. She'll guide you to the promised land. Ryu shook his head as Ailsa seemed to lose herself in her own little world. First, we'll have to prepare your body. That is the easiest and most straightforward thing to do. The mental and Kai realms require finesse. But for the body realm, as long as you're willing to endure pain, you can always move forward. But we've been doing it inappropriately until now. You have to remember that just like different Kai can have affinities, blood can as well. You should be taking spiritual roots from beasts that share affinities with your blood, or else you're just wasting too many resources in the conversion. We need to start hunting ice, fire, and lightning beasts. Second is your mental realm. This is the weakest of your three realms, but it's incredibly important for the path you want to take. Don't worry, Big Sis will definitely bully those zoo ancestors into submission. Grand ancestral bloodlines. The next day, Ryu woke up early, allowing the rising sun to guide his martial forms. You've heard this many times before, but balance is important. It allows you to not just have strength, but to use it effectively. It's for this reason those who have stabilized their cultivation realms are stronger than those who have just recently broken through. I believe what you should be aiming for in your martial forms is this balance. One day, you should aim to combine them all into a singular form. Only then will truly unlock the potential hidden within your body. Ailsa slowly spoke her thoughts as Ryu focused on his most-minute movements. He felt that she was correct once more. A martial form was meant to solidify the foundation of an individual from a certain clan, changing depending on one's lineage and bloodline. Since Ryu was the result of 4 ancestral bloodlines, his path forward to unleashing his full potential was steeper than others despite his talent. I think we can hold off on training your body until we accumulate more spiritual roots. For now, I want to speak with you about something important. Sweat dripped from Ryu's perfectly sculpted body. Ailsa's words registered just as he completed his final stance. HM, do you think you can do all of this alone? Seeing that she now had Ryu's full attention, Ailsa asked a thought-provoking question. Who? Ryu took a deep breath, stabilizing himself. What do you mean? What I mean is that your current enemies not only have a near-billion-year head start on you, but they are a network of clans and sects that took down your Tatsuya clan. While it is true that absolute strength trumps everything, you have to remember that this absolute strength doesn't have to come from a single individual. It can represent the combined strength of countless individuals as well. Ryu frowned. He knew that Ailsa was correct, but he truly hadn't focused on such things. He had his hands full already strengthening himself. That alone felt like an uphill battle. Of course, that wasn't because he had come across any staunch roadblocks, but rather because he felt that no matter how quickly he went, it wasn't fast enough. Ailsa sighed. I know what you're thinking. Growing your own power is challenging enough, but the only way you could even dream of accomplishing this alone is if you become a sky god. And not only might that not be enough, it would take an obscene amount of time. What I will tell you is that those with your mysteries of heaven and earth pupils have a massive advantage. Later stages of cultivation heavily emphasize comprehension, so those hurdles will be lower for you, especially with the help of the embryonic origin flame. But even with the most giving estimates, you can't hope to reach that realm without several million years of cultivation. Ryu sucked in a cold breath. He knew that Ailsa was being extremely giving even with that time frame. According to what Ryu knew, absolute geniuses, at 1 million years old, would only reach the Tao pedestal realm, a realm still 3 levels from the sky god realm. This was why Ryu's wife, Alina, was seen as such a genius. She had reached that realm even before her 1,000th birthday. Unfortunately, even she was nowhere near the sky god realm. From here to then, you have to cross the spiritual severing realm, the divine vessel realm, the connection heaven realm, the immortal ring realm, the path extinction realm, the Tao pedestal realm, the cosmic seed realm, and the world sea realm. Of those, many can be forcibly passed through with resources and tenacity. But the Tao pedestal, cosmic seed, and world sea realms are all contemplation realms. You don't simply cross them by accumulating resources and kai. Though there are some incredibly rare herbs that can accomplish this, banking on finding them would be the epitome of foolishness. To top this off, I've glossed over the dangers. The spiritual severing and path extinction realms are especially dangerous. If you act rashly, you will harm, kill, or even the worst fate for you, cripple yourself. There were many other things Ailsa maintained her silence about, even though she said all of these things. For example, if Ryu focused too much on speed, his foundation would suffer. What was the point if he simply ended up with an empty cultivation realm? You want me to build up forces? Ryu finally said after a moment of silence. This is the necessary thing to do. If I was a Quibus fairy who could lead you down the path of necromancy, maybe you really could do this alone. But unfortunately, I have no such ability. And even if I did, your mental realm is your weakest aspect. It's impossible for you to become a great necromancer with such limited capacities. Ryu nodded, falling into deep thought once more. Ailsa was correct. Controlling vast amounts of undead required refined spiritual Kai control. Ryu had stumbled upon some short snippets of this truth while researching the Death Shrine. Is there no other way? Another way for what? To become a one-man army. Ryu looked up into Ailsa's ruby eyes. It isn't that I'm so prideful that I must do it alone. The issue is both one of time and trust. Firstly, strengthening those beneath me will be an issue, and reeling in those above me will be even more difficult. Though we could eliminate the latter issue thanks to your eyes, the former still remains. Ryu was right. As a cultist fairy, Ailsa could see through the talents of individuals with a single glance. Ryu didn't need to look blindly for talents to take under his wings. The issue was, no matter how great the talent, could they ever be as talented as Ryu? No, and that answer led back to the question of time. Secondly, there's the matter of trust. One only needs to look at my Tatsuya clan being backstabbed repeatedly to understand that humans are vile creatures. Considering my goal to topple the foremost power of this realm, it lends to even more uncertainty. In addition, I'm not a very good leader. Ailsa smiled slightly at Ryu being so forthcoming about his faults. To become a one-man army, Ailsa fell into her own thoughts. There are a few options if this is truly the path you want to take. In truth, your words aren't without logic. The issue is that the paths that give way to such a thing all focus around one thing, one's mental realm. The heavens are fair. Those who focus on their minds are frail and thus need this sort of support. But here are a few possibilities. Grand ancestral bloodlines. The first path is the easiest for you. Some of the best beast tamers in history have been those with your ice jade crystal body for obvious reasons. Little brother just smells too good. Ailsa giggled. This will be easier on your mental realm as well. Beasts are obviously more autonomous than undead creatures, so the pressure on your mental realm is only limited to the initial contract signed. In addition, beasts can improve very quickly. Their comprehension is mostly based on their innate talent, so they really only need resources to cross realms. Still, there are cons as well. Firstly, beasts aren't as unintelligent as humans paint them out to be. As of the fifth order and above, their thoughts are no less complex than yours. As such, they have their own societies and hierarchies as well. If a human suddenly starts accumulating vast amounts of their kind, it won't go unnoticed. In addition, the selection of beasts in this realm is lacking. There's a reason the dominant race here is that of humans. The ancient beasts were killed off long ago, leaving only fledgling beasts. The greatest beast of this realm is likely only of the 10th order, far more powerful than you now, but not nearly enough to help you accomplish your goals. This means that if you want to take this route, little brother will have to do one of two things. You'll have to either set aside even more resources so that I can help the beasts of this realm break their bloodline shackles, or we'll have to travel to other realms. Of course, the latter of these options makes the first drawback I mentioned many times more dangerous. Ryu listened carefully as he slipped into a tub of seeking wood filled with vital tree essence for recovery. Though there were drawbacks, it wasn't impossible. After all, Ryu had the incubator and Ailsa, both of whom were capable of helping him nurture large swaths of spiritual herbs. He was in a unique position to raise many beasts. The most glaring issue was one Ailsa hadn't mentioned, and that was one of space. Even if Ryu had the resources to raise so many beasts, where would he do so? The incubator's space was decently large, at least the size of a large clan's territory even on the shrine plane. But one had to remember that it required Ryu's strength to transport things in and out of it. That was a limiting factor for sure. The second option is necromancy. Hearing this, Ryu looked up toward Ailsa in confusion. Hadn't she just said that wasn't a possibility? Ailsa smiled coyly. Though I'm not a quibus fairy, who said one must have a quibus fairy to become a necromancer? In all of this, you shouldn't forget that you were chosen by the Phoenix Sky God. Ryu's eyes widened with surprise. You mean, your trial encompassed life, reincarnation, and death for a reason. The white flames of your spiritual foundation are also linked to that reason. The life flame, known as the ice flame of your Ice Phoenix clan, is blue. The death flame of the Dark Phoenix clan is black. The reincarnation flame, known as the rebirth flame of your Fire Phoenix clan, is red. The culmination of them all are your white flames. The Phoenix Sky God embodies them all. This is why his legend is so mudded, and it took so much effort for you to grasp the faintest image of his life. If you tap into his legacy, not only life and reincarnation, but the subtleties of death will lay bare before you. Even if your mental realm will restrict you, comprehending death will greatly lessen the burden. Unfortunately, this path has even more roadblocks. Namely, though the Phoenix Sky God followed the path of death in part, he wasn't a necromancer, meaning even if you reflected upon his legacy, you would receive no help from him in that regard. In addition, you have two opposing Phoenix bloodlines within your body that will make it difficult for you to grasp concepts of death. To make matters worse, you also have the lightning Qilin bloodline within you. Lightning is exceptionally good at wiping out yin, which would make your path even more difficult. Ryu smiled wryly. It seemed there were even more challenges to this one than the last one. Maybe the only good news was that in Ryu's time, there was no taboo on death comprehension like there was for those who cultivated the mental realm. The third possibility is something you likely don't know about, as it's a path available only to those with a noble fairy as their life partner. Ailsa stuck her ample chest out proudly, something that looked quite adorable in her half-a-foot-tall form. It's possible for me to open a path to the fairy realm and allow you to contract other fairies, though it would be almost impossible to quell fairies at or above my level. It would be possible to take control of lesser fairies. The more fairies you have supporting you and even fighting on your behalf, the easier fighting alone becomes. Though much like the other paths, this path has its issues as well. First, taking fairies under your wing can only be done if both parties are willing. It cannot be done by force. As you know, intimacy is incredibly important, and the stronger the fairy is, the less useful I am in helping that process. Secondly, fairies can only exist outside the fairy realm with the help of an anchor. Because I'm such a high-grade fairy, much of your capacity as an anchor has already been taken up, and the only way to increase that capacity is by cultivating your mental realm. Ryu sighed. He had always thought his talent was infallible. Come to find out his talent was suddenly his most limiting factor. The fourth possibility simply requires the knowledge and vast resources, and that's to use puppets. High-grade puppets are quite good in battle, though they'd never be as good as humans. They simply don't have the flexibility. Quite frankly, though this option puts the least stress on your mental realm, it's also the worst option. At least I've never heard of a puppet as strong as a World Sea cultivator. And the fifth option, Ailsa smiled. Knowing you, it is the option you'd like the best, and that's simply to become so powerful that no outside aid matters. Focus your growth on movement speed and recoverability. With the northern heavenly wind, you have the potential for your speed to become unmatched, but that alone isn't enough. We need to raise the northern heavenly wind from its embryonic stage by feeding it more winds. In addition, finding the southern wind, the breath of life, would give you endless stamina and recoverability. Emphasize your Phoenix bloodlines. Rebirth from near death and the natural order of life are both hidden within you. So, what do you think? Did Big Sis give you enough options? Which will you choose? Ryu fell into his thoughts. Though he now had many options, Each was vastly more difficult than the next. He began to wonder if using such a path was even worth it. Maybe he should begin to cultivate his own forces, as xianxia suggested from the very beginning. Grand ancestral bloodlines, xianxia didn't rush Ryu. This sort of decision was too important. In addition, she herself knew how tall the mountain Ryu had to climb would be regardless of his choice. Clans and alliances didn't just pop up out of thin air. It required countless epochs of effort for a clan to rise up. And even then, the vast majority would never be as powerful as Ryu's Tatsuya clan. Because of this, xianxia almost felt that Ryu was in the right wanting to go at it alone. "How do you feel about puppeteering?" Ryu suddenly asked. xianxia blinked. "Puppeteering? Ah, I understand. You want to compensate for your lack of talent along the mental realm path with your Kai realm talent. Puppet masters. They were an incredibly ancient cult of individuals who used their deft control of Kai to bolster their strength. Instead of controlling corpses with their mental realm like necromancers did, they used their Kai like the strings of a puppeteer. There were many pros to this path. Corpses responded faster and with more agility to commands. However, there were many cons as well. Typically, necromancers could control more corpses. In addition, puppets tended to be less durable, namely because stronger puppets required thicker Kai strings. The trade-off was too steep, and, though it's possible, you shouldn't believe that Yao completely escaped the limitations of your mental realm by taking the puppeteering path. Do you remember what is limiting your dual polearm-wielding path? Hearing this, Ryu already knew what was coming and smiled bitterly. Puppeteering requires controlling multiple variables at once. Strictly speaking, it's far more complex and layered than simply controlling two weapons. Anything that places such a heavy burden on your mind requires your mental realm. It's unavoidable. Ryu closed his eyes, nodding solemnly, but his depressed state didn't last for long. He couldn't afford to be too depressed. He didn't have the time for it. Not long later, his eyes opened with a keen resolution. "You've made a decision." "Yes." Ryu nodded heavily. "All of these matters point toward one obvious choice. There's no room to be accepting of my weakness. Instead of spending so much time trying to accommodate my inadequacies, I want to fix them." Ryu turned his gaze toward xianxia. "How do I rid myself of this weakness?" "I see. So that's your choice." xianxia smiled. "I should have known. It's quite typical of you." "Good, Big Sis will help you then. But you should know that fighting against one's lack of talent isn't something that ever ends. It's a battle of a lifetime. I think this will be a good experience for you, not just for your strength, but for your mind." Ryu understood the hidden meaning of xianxia's words and said no more. He had too many advantages to lament his bad luck. If he couldn't make use of the cards he was dealt, in spite of how good they truly were, then didn't that mean no one could defeat fate? At the very least, he wanted to understand just what truly battling against fate meant. So he waited silently as xianxia fell into her thoughts. He knew that she was tossing away all of her previous plans for his sake, and he couldn't have been more thankful. "As you know," xianxia finally spoke, "there are limiters to what one can do with their minds without Kai realm cultivation. It is unadvisable to enter the soul birth realm until after one completes their immortal ring. For example, currently, little brother is in the lowest mental realm, the spiritual entrance realm. Much like your body, where you are currently accumulating as much vital Kai as you can to prepare for the next realm. You are also meant to be accumulating as much spiritual Kai as you can for your mental realm. Unfortunately, this is where your limiter lies. Just like your ancestral bloodline can hold more vital Kai than others who have lesser bloodlines, your mental realm is limited by your talent, in that you can't accumulate as much spiritual Kai as a genius of the Zhu clan would be able to. Still, little brother does have some advantages in the mental realm. Firstly, the origin flame. It allows little brother to have perfect recall. In fact, to call it perfect recall is almost doing this treasure a disservice. Simply put, even with your lack of mental realm talent, you won't ever stumble in your visualizations. Second is little brother's heavenly pupils. Not only do you have perfect recall, but you can grasp the essence of visualizations far quicker than others. The issue is that these two advantages are useless. Do you know why? Ryu nodded. Because neither increases my limits. If anything, all they do help me reach my low ceiling faster than anyone else could, but doesn't fix the root of the problem. Exactly right. What little brother needs is a method to increase your limits. I have these methods, but they come in two forms. One is luck, the other is pain. Ailsa smiled an ambiguous smile. The luck aspect is already accomplished. The spirit-seeking lilies are treasures one can only hope for and never ask for. Taking even one petal can instantly double your mental realm size. However, little brother's mental realm talent is at the point where that won't be helpful. This is why little brother must combine this luck with pain. Ailsa took a deep breath. Do you remember Tribulation 9 Clouds? Ryu flinched involuntarily. So that really is the only choice. Ailsa giggled, giving Ryu a knowing look. It seemed Ryu had already thought of this possibility and had just been avoiding it. Tribulation 9 Clouds. It was a technique that used tribulation lightning to forcibly increase one's potential. Ryu had seen it while he was trying to pick his Kai techniques. Though Ryu had found it in a section of Kai techniques, the foundation of the technique was turning tribulation lightning into Kai. There was no limitation on the kind of Kai it could be. Meaning, spiritual Kai was also a possibility, even vital Kai. Ryu, this is your only path. Some people aren't even lucky enough to know such a technique exists. They don't even have the choice of risking themselves to improve. I wasn't joking when I said fighting against one's lack of talent was a lifelong endeavor. Even after you break your limiters in your current cultivation realm, you'll find out that after you break into the next realm, they have limiters of their own, and so will the next and the next. This is why simply taking the spirit-seeking lily is useless. You need to be ready to fight against the cards you were dealt every step of the way. I understand. A flicker of resolution colored Ryu's silver eyes. Grand ancestral bloodlines days had passed since Ailsa and Ryu decided upon a path. Ryu was currently heading deep into unmarked pedestal plane territory, with a new badge hanging from the hip of his black robes. Moments ago, Ryu had registered for the Mercenary Guild of Valor City. Thanks to his honor card, he received a great many privileges, namely, he could take missions regardless of their order. Though Ryu was committed to his mental realm's improvement, he hadn't forgotten about his deadline of 2 years. He had to somehow accumulate enough Kai stones to open the barrier to the moon world, and the Mercenary Guild was just one method of doing so. In truth, Ryu's best bet was his herbology. However, he decided against it after a stern warning from Ailsa. She reminded Ryu that there were definitely people looking for him now, because of her, and that it would be easy to dodge those individuals as long as he kept those who were aware of his status to a minimum. The reality was that those of the inner and core rings, and those of the Blossom Plane, cared little for a so-called honor card. But a black-grade herbologist of younger than 20 years was a shocking thing recognized by all. Ryu solemnly took Ailsa's advice, realizing he had been too rash. If he wanted to take advantage of his herbology to make money, he had to do so covertly. Don't worry too much about making money, Ailsa said confidently, enjoying the rushing wind caused by Ryu's agility. You have this noble big sis by your side. The places we'll be frequenting very soon will be some of the most dangerous areas this plane has to offer. With danger comes profit. If worse comes to worst, you can always sell some of your breaking ore and spirit-seeking lilies. They're worth far more. Speaking of which, you still haven't told me. Ryu responded, leaping from tree to tree. Just what are the abilities of the black vein lilies? Ailsa was a cultist fairy, and there was a reason her trial to find her life partner was an herbology exam. They had a very special connection to life. Ailsa could see through the potential of not only beasts, but spiritual herbs as well. Even if the knowledge wasn't in her mind immediately, she would only need to meditate on it for a moment. Of course, this was restricted to some extent by Ryu as usual. I can sense that the black vein lilies are helpful for your pupils, but exactly how is vague to me. Ryu nodded. He felt so as well. When he first laid eyes on them, he felt his pupils throb. But that could be for any number of reasons. His pupils also throbbed when danger was nearby. So it was possible that the black vein lilies were poisonous. Hearing Ailsa assure him that they weren't was a relief. The question is whether the black vein lilies are specifically helpful for your pupils, or if they are helpful for all heavenly pupils. I believe it's the latter. And if that's the case, the answer is even more vague. All right, focus. By my calculations, the closest lightning-dense region is in this direction. We can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You can complete a 4th-order mission as a Kai refinement expert to help the awoken moon sect's faith. And you can begin to cultivate tribulation, 9 clouds. Plus, there should be some lightning affinity beasts nearby that will have very helpful spiritual roots. Tribulation 9 clouds was most effective with true tribulation lightning. However, such places were obviously incredibly rare. Even with Ailsa's abilities, they would take a lot of time or luck to find. Luckily, with Ailsa's guidance and Ryu's level of comprehension, normal lightning could be used as well. In fact, it was probably better if Ryu took this path for now. With his current mental strength, a single wisp of true tribulation lightning could eradicate him in body and soul. The 4th-order mission Ryu had taken was a request from the Alchemy Association. They needed an earth-grade herb known as striking weed. It grew in lightning-dense areas, as was colloquially known as the lightning rod herb. Though the mission was actually quite dangerous, the pay was decent at 10 lower mortal Kai stones. Considering a single stone of that quality was worth 1,000,000 gold coins, 10 was worth Valor City's revenue in a whole quarter. Of course, these revenue totals only tallied normal gold transactions, and not Kai stone ones. With Ryu's speed now bordering on the divine vessel realm, even without evoking his northern winds phenomena, it only took him a few hours to reach his destination. The outer ring of the pedestal plane was controlled by 9 major cities and 27 fifth-order sects. However, there were major gaps within their territory that acted as havens for beasts. Though Ailsa was correct in saying that the beasts of this realm were relatively weak, that was only in relation to the top experts on the Shrine Plain, now known as the Martial Plain. There were plenty of beast territories on the Pedestal and Blossom Plains that human experts were hesitant to enter. One example of them was the very lightning-dense area Ryu was now entering Flash Mountain. The mountain range had an ominous looming aura to it. It didn't look as though it was formed of normal rock. Instead, it seemed like the perpetual lightning strikes it suffered had turned the mountain's surface into a reflective obsidian. It was very easy for one to lose their grip or slip on such a surface. Dark and large cumulonimbus clouds hung in the air. Though it should have been midday, it felt as though it was midnight. Strikes of pale lightning coursed through the black clouds ominously, as though daring a target to come forward. All right, little Ryu, be careful from here on out, especially when you near the striking weed. I'll point out the direction so that you don't need to wander blindly. Ryu took a step forward, feeling the crunch of fine ash beneath his feet. Looks like they've already come out to greet me. A glaive appeared in Ryu's hand as Beast stepped from the forest that surrounded the base of the obsidian mountain. It took the shape of a raging bull, but the eerie calm in its eye could shake the soul of even calmest man. Its horns had a menacing curve to them, and there was a subtle spark of lightning that arched between them, sizzling the air with an out-of-place heat. A slick coat of black covered its large 3-meter-tall body. Objectively, it was quite a beautiful creature, if you overlooked the bulging muscles beneath its shining coat of fur, that is. In truth, Ryu didn't know what this beast was either. Luckily, this creature is known as the Thunder Bull. You can tell by the subtle hints of golden fur just above its hooves that it recently entered the 4th order. It has high short burst speed, but low agility. Grand ancestral bloodlines. You're saying the new throne of the Awoken Moon sect strolled in and took so many 4th order missions at once. A tall, Fiery, red-haired man slammed his palm against counter. There was no surprise that such a large commotion had erupted within the mercenary guilds. Missions could only be claimed once, until the certain deadline passed, or the claimer admitted their failure and paid a penalty. No one else could accept such missions. Not only had Ryu taken a fourth-order mission, he took all 6 that had become available, leaving none for the highest-grade mercenary squads. This meant that if these teams wanted another mission, they'd have to travel all the way to another major city in hopes of claiming one of their own. In truth, this was simply a matter of bad timing. Fourth-order missions weren't frequently accepted. This was why Ryu felt so comfortable taking them all for himself. Completing a single one left high-level mercenary squads full for years. The issue was that it just so happened that one of the only 2 fourth-order mercenary squads of Valor City had come to claim a mission, only to find that they were all gone. This wasn't the worst part of it all. Rather, that honor was reserved for the blow to their pride. Being titled a fourth-order mercenary didn't mean you could take on a fourth-order mission alone. At most, a fourth-order mercenary could solo a third-order mission, but would need a team of able-bodied individuals to tackle a fourth-order one. Hearing that a kid of not even 20 years old was taking on so many alone was a great blow to them. "Please calm yourself," the receptionist replied far more calmly than one would expect when faced with such a powerful man. "Our rules are our rules. He has a time limit of 1 month. The time limits do not stack. You may come back and claim your missions in 1 month should he fail. If not, I hope that Yao'll accept the result." Interestingly enough, the red-haired man steadied his breathing and pulled back at these words. The reason was something only the veterans of the guild would be aware of. Though they went by a generic name like Mercenary Guild, this was just a singular branch of an establishment that had its roots on the Blossom Plain. The success or failure of mere fourth-order mission meant little to them. "Leader, what happened?" A group of 7 men and women looked toward the red-haired man. He had gone to claim a mission, but actually came back empty-handed. After hearing the explanation, it was no surprise that they were all enraged, but there was nothing they could do. They could only come back 1 month later. At the base of Mount Flash Mountain, Ryu's body flickered like a specter. Though his strength output could only be said to match a normal higher Kai refinement expert at most when using only a single arm, his speed was such that even spiritual severing realm experts had trouble keeping up with him. The Thunder Bull was learning of these matters firsthand. At first, it disdained Ryu's attempts and simply saw him as a snack. However, Ryu's shallow, negligible slashes began to stack upon one another, growing more layered. Suddenly, before the Thunder Bull even realized it, its body had become a canvas marred by thick red paint. It soon fell tragically, a product of its excessive blood loss and fatigue. Store the Thunder Bull's horns carefully. They carry a dense lightning Kai. Well, use the incubator and the horns in tandem to prime your mental realm. If we use this method, we can make the volatile lightning Kai docile. This will make absorbing our target lightning for this trip less dangerous. Ryu's brows lifted in surprise as he dissected the Thunder Bull's corpse. We can use the incubator in that way. Then doesn't that mean I could use it to absorb spiritual roots as well? That would make my body realm cultivation much faster. That is true, but you should be wary of using the incubator so liberally. There will be certain times in the future where the incubator won't be able to transform challenges into a gentle flow for you. Making cultivation too easy isn't necessarily a good thing. For example, this Flash Mountain. The lightning we'll be using to expand your mental realm's potential comes from the skies themselves. Obviously, the incubator can't make this energy more docile for you. There will be moments like this for the body realm as well. Of course, the 4th realm of the body is known as the 9 life revolutions realm. Each step is separated into what are known as destructions. In order to move forward, a body realm cultivator needs to destroy their body to its most basic building blocks before building it back up. This needs to be repeated 9 times. If up until that point you've only experienced incredibly relaxed cultivation, You will die just attempting this." Ryu nodded solemnly, taking Ailsa's advice to heart. "Don't worry though, I'm not saying never use the incubator. It will be especially useful for your Kai realm. It's not that there are no situations where easy Kai cultivation will be a detriment to you. It's just that your Kai cultivation talent is so high, I don't believe it will make much of a difference. There is a problem though," Ryu said, looking at the horns he just separated from the Thunder Bull's skull. "I don't think I can control enough spatial Kai to bring these horns into the incubator." The limitation of the incubator had reared its ugly head once more, but Ailsa only smiled. "Did you forget? Not only are our souls tied together, but don't you remember the special ability us fairies have? We are very good at existing between reality and imaginary. Because our souls are tied together, I can use your treasures as easily as you can. And because I can exist between realities, I can mitigate the stress high-level treasures place on you, making it easier to bring them in." Ailsa seemed to continuously give Ryu pleasant surprises. He had to admit, having someone to rely on and share his burden with lifted much of the weight on his heart. Whether he liked it or not, he grew closer to Ailsa every day. Still, while Ryu's mind was focused on his self-improvement and began his climb up Flash Mountain, the commotion he had caused in the outer ring was spreading. It wasn't just the mercenary guilds, but the geniuses of the 27 sects were greatly shaken, though one could argue that this would happen naturally regardless. In this case, the reaction was very unnatural, as though someone or multiple someones were pulling strings in the background, ensuring that the commotion was as exaggerated as possible. With the inner ring selection quickly approaching, the shared realm of the outer ring would open far ahead of schedule, with everyone only having a single target in mind: Throne Ryu. Grand ancestral bloodlines, Ryu glided up the side of the obsidian mountain. After becoming a wind heir, he actually found that it was possible for him to fly. In fact, he was nimbler and faster than spiritual severing realm experts in this regard. Though spiritual severing realm experts could fly, they usually only did so for short distances. The stress it placed on one's Kai reserves was too great, but Ryu wasn't limited in this way. Though his Kai had yet to match those experts in thickness, the effort he needed to fly was far less than theirs. Unfortunately, what should have been a smooth journey thanks to his northern wind was constantly impeded by beasts. Though Ryu managed to dodge the 5th and 6th order powerhouses that might be hiding within Flash Mountain, his attempts forced him into the territory of lesser beasts who also wanted to avoid angering these kings. For such a harsh environment, Ryu was surprised by the sheer number of beasts. He was only a third of the way up the mountain, but he had already had half a dozen encounters. It only makes sense. For lower-level beasts, their only instinct is to grow strong. It doesn't matter what they have to suffer through to reach those ends. This mountain is a holy land for lightning-based cultivation. Make sure to collect their spiritual roots well. It's a bit too much to expect you to absorb 4th order spiritual roots with your current body strength, but I believe the stress will be a good experience for you. Plus, your ancestral-grade lightning Qilin blood should be able to handle it. Ryu passively listened to Ailsa as he collected his 7th beast spiritual root. By his calculations, this should enough to force his lightning Qilin blood toward its peak potential within the pulse tempering realm. With a bit more effort, he could prepare to enter the vessel tempering realm. Ryu was quite excited by this prospect. The vessel tempering realm was linked with the divine vessel realm. If Ryu entered it, he would gain a massive boost in strength. Of course, reaching the peak potential of the pulse tempering realm and actually opening the vessels of the vessel tempering realm were two massively different feats. Ryu would need many more resources to open his body vessels. Still, this wasn't something to get down about. Thanks to the advantage his speed and heavenly pupils gave him, Ryu had much higher battle prowess than even he had expected. As long as the beast he met was below the higher 4th order, he was confident in winning easily. This allowed him to accumulate resources far easier than someone else of his cultivation realm would. Once Ryu reached the upper limit of the pulse-tempering realm, he believed he would be unmatched below the divine vessel realm. By then, it would become even easier to collect the resources he needed. Xianxia, who had been silently sitting on Ryu's shoulder, suddenly perked up, her head turning toward a particular direction. "What is it?" Ryu asked as he collected the final valuable portions of a fourth-order bird beast. "I just sensed something that might be worth taking a look at." A pensive expression spread across Xia's lovely features. "Worth looking at." Cultist sprites are very sensitive to existences with potential. It's like a pull that pushes us toward those worthy of being nurtured. The reason why I was able to point out that Ember Clan father-son pair was because I sensed that they were worth nurturing, especially the son and his blacksmithing talent. Ryu's brow shot up. "You sensed a beast worth nurturing. It should be a thunder rock," Xianxia said after a moment. "What did you just say?" Ryu froze. "The rock." It was an ancient beast on the same level as Ryu's 4 ancestral grade bloodlines. In fact, it was one of the few ancient beasts that managed to protect its bloodline from being taken by human clans. However, this wasn't the most pressing part. If there really was a thunder rock in this flash mountain, Ryu's only path was death. Ancient beasts were incredibly sensitive to other ancestral-grade bloodlines that came from beasts of their level. A true thunder rock would have sensed Ryu the moment he entered this mountain range. "Don't worry, a true thunder rock wouldn't be here. This lightning kai isn't anywhere near dense enough. Also, even the weakest thunder rock would be of at least the 7th or 8th order. You'd already be dead if one was here. I simply sensed a beast with a small strand of thunder rock in its blood." Ryu sighed, a breath of relief. "So if we invest enough into this beast, there may be a day where it could become a true thunder rock." "You could say so, though nothing is certain. Still, since you've yet to pick the path you want, and would like to focus on raising the potential of your mental realm, there's no reason to ignore this beast's potential. Though, you should note that even a small strand of such blood is no joke." Ryu's eyes turned cold. Which way? Facing a beast with a small strand of an ancestral bloodline was no easy task. When Ryu measured his combat prowess, he always measured himself up to normal beasts and cultivators. However, if Ryu could jump several levels to fight those beyond him in strength, why couldn't others do so? Xianxia silently pointed toward a particular direction. It was no surprise that it was into the dark depths of Flash Mountain. The rumbling of an eerie thunder boomed overhead, causing the already slippery surface Ryu stood on to tremble. As if these matters weren't an ominous sign enough, the pitter-patter of rain soon followed. Still, there was no hesitation in Ryu's steps. 9 cycles of 100 million years was enough. His family had waited long enough. His body became a blur, completely ignoring the beasts that tried to engage with him. None of them dared to follow his path after a certain point either way. It wasn't long before Ryu laid eyes on the beast, mostly because it stood proudly on a mountain peak, not trying to hide its presence in the slightest. The rock could only be described as beautiful. It had the long, proud neck of a peacock and the sharp gaze of an eagle. Its 3 tails fluttered about like silver-laced silk, but its feathers were what truly made one's heart palpitate. Like plates of platinum, they shone a reflective rainbow even under the dark sky. Grand ancestral bloodlines. Ryu's cold eyes met the rock's. It was as though 2 lines of silver crossed time and space. The rock seemed curious about Ryu's sudden appearance, amused even. Normally, beasts completely avoided its territory. Whenever it wanted to eat, it would have to leave and chase after those cowards. He had to say that this was the first time someone had willingly come to him. As for Ryu, he was surprised for an entirely different reason. He felt a pressure he had only experienced once before. The issue was that the originator of that pressure had been a connecting heaven realm expert. But Ryu was certain that this rock was just a peak 3rd order beast. How was that even possible? A strand can't be so powerful, can it? Ryu's brow furrowed as he asked Xianxia this question. He had 4 full ancestral bloodlines running through his veins. So why wasn't the pressure he gave off a match for this beast, who supposedly only had a strand? It can't be helped, Ailsa replied. Humans don't have the bodily strength needed to hold ancient beast bloodlines from birth, so they can only slowly grow into theirs. However, beasts are more appropriately adjusted. Though he only has a strand while you have the full bloodlines, at this point in your lives, he's still superior in that respect. You'll begin to see the true strength of your blood only after entering the divine vessel and vessel tempering realms. Ryu's eyes sharpened. It'll give you an opportunity. Even Ailsa was shocked by Ryu's sudden actions. He was talking to the rock. If you follow me, it'll give you the chance to break through your limits. Would you like to take this chance? Or would you rather spend the rest of your life lording over this small mountain range? Ryu could see it. His eyes could see the intelligence in the rock. He could see the pride in its eyes, its unwillingness to be normal. Ryu felt that after breaking 2 seals, many things were clearer to him. The rock's long neck bristled. The beautiful silver plumes that spread from its neck to the top of its tall head flickered under the heavy rain. In that moment, it suddenly spread its proud wings. Like a blinding silver moon under the dark sky above, it spread itself outward over 6 meters. It didn't answer Ryu's question. Instead, it attacked, as though saying it cared little for empty words. Even with Ryu's pupils and his preparedness, he had never seen anything so fast. In fact, he was certain this beast was faster than him, and this wasn't even its peak speed. A flash of silver swept down from the mountain, charging toward Ryu. Ryu no longer played around. His greatest advantage, his speed, had suddenly been taken away. Without the slightest hesitation, he brought out his spears, clutching one in both hands as he met the vicious claws of the soaring rock. Even as Ryu was sent flying, he felt an excitement bubbling within his veins. This was what he wanted. He wanted to be pushed to his absolute limits. Recently, he felt that his battles had become too easy. His speed was simply too overwhelming. In combination with his heavenly pupils, many of the opponents he faced didn't stand a chance. But he had finally found a beast who could take his greatest strength away. This was yet another opportunity to break past his limits and reach a greater height. His Tatsuya saintly weapons had stalled for too long. Oddities. A collection of individuals had gathered in a room Ryu would find very familiar. It was none other than the association head's spacious office, though one would be surprised to find that it was far more tidy than it had been in the past. It seemed these guests were quite important. The details are above your pay grade. You only need to answer the questions I've asked. A large, black-cloaked man responded to the association head's question stiffly, obviously giving the old man no semblance of face. The association head's brows furrowed as he looked toward his granddaughter Molly. We haven't had anyone take the black-grade herbology exam. No. The cloaked man followed the association head's gaze, but said nothing else. I'm sure you understand the consequences for lying to us. Are you not aware of the records? All alchemy associations are linked. You didn't need to come here to ask me these questions. The association head's temper flared. What I am and am not aware of aren't matters you need to concern yourself with, or else it would be a shame if another daughter of your family disappeared. The association head stood abruptly, his palm slamming downward so fiercely that his large desk splintered into bits of wood and metal. Don't you dare push me, the old man growled. Every man has his limits. If you think you can take everything away from me and only silently accept it, you'd be wrong. I don't mind killing a few of you before heading off to an early grave. That's enough, Edwin. These aren't the matters we came here for. The atmosphere chilled when this second cloaked figure spoke. By its slender figure, gentle voice, and the way its cloak tugged along its curves, there was no doubt that this was a woman. Yet she forced the large cloaked man to back down with ease. I apologize for my subordinate's rude words. Well, take our leave. But I hope you understand that we do not move without just cause. Something precious was taken, and it's our duty to bring it back. With those words, the cloaked figures left, leaving behind a silent grandfather-granddaughter pair. Commander Fidroha, why did we come here? The large man finally couldn't withhold his questions. It's been a few weeks since those matters ended, but the target still hasn't been found. So, obviously, the search radius needs to be expanded before the trail runs cold. Though her face was covered by a dark cloak, it felt as though her sinister smirk left the world feeling cold. Grand ancestral bloodlines. Molly looked toward her grandfather. Over the past few years, the gaze she gave this old man could only be described as cold. But in these moments, an air of complexity took over as she looked on toward her grandfather's figure. He never seemed so vulnerable before. Bits of wood and metal dropped to the ground, but errant pieces of paper filled with illegible chicken scratch fell almost too slowly, swaying under the still turbulent air. So Grandpa, Molly bit her lip. What was she talking about? A sadness pervaded the association head's sunken eyes. But when he heard his granddaughter call him Grandpa for the first time in years, there was a bit of hope that lit his eyes. Never mind those matters, little Molly. The association head waved his hand. But, stop. The association head shook his head. There's a reason I've never told you about these things. Please, if you care for this old man of yours even the slightest bit anymore, don't ask. Blood began to seep from Molly's lips. She didn't even realize that her teeth had dug so far into her soft pink lips. The association head watched as his granddaughter's petite figure left slowly. As much as Molly felt her heart ache in the face of her weakened grandfather, the association head's pain was 10 times more watching his little girl carry a burden he couldn't lift for her. He looked up blankly at the bland ceiling above his head. Though his eyes were a deep, emotionless pit, the shaking of his body and the gripping of his fists made his rage clear. This was his true face. The face of a man who was a step away from having nothing to lose. If it wasn't for the fact he still had his granddaughter, he would have already forsaken everything and laid his life down for revenge. The old man brought his hand over the left of his chest. Through his thin robes, he could feel a deep scarring that had long since healed. His fingers followed its pattern, crossing from left to right, then back again. Even now, this scar throbbed with the very same pain he had the day he etched it in himself. The apostles, the blood vessels in the old man's eyes tore. Tears of blood fell from his emotionless face. Asterisk. If one had been anywhere near Flash Mountain over the past few days, it wouldn't have been impossible to see a man and a majestic bird fighting a battle of honor. In truth, it didn't seem as though either one was intent to take the life of the other, but neither seemed to want to lose either. Each stood bloodied and tired. The man's black robes were ripped asunder, revealing a shining flexible armor that radiated a blinding white light and a pale light blue hue. Though the only reason you could see those colors so clearly, instead of the waterfall of blood that should have been, was precisely because of the heavily falling rain. As for the majestic bird, its feathers, once shimmering with the light one might expect from a silver dragon, were bent and misshapen in many areas. In fact, it wasn't impossible to find precious pieces of its lustrous coat of feathers strewn about the mountain range. None bothered this man-bird pair. It was impossible to say that the two of them were the most powerful on this mountain range. So there had to be another reason they were left alone. Maybe those more creatures couldn't be bothered, or maybe they respected the battle of two men. Finally, the bird's long, proud neck drooped. Its eyes still had an endless fire hidden behind them, but its body simply couldn't keep up. In the end, the man stood tall, his lungs screaming for air. There was no doubt. This man was Ryu Tatsuya, and the bird was a descendant of the Thunder Rock. Ryu gripped his spears, using them to hold himself up. During this battle, he had refused Ailsa's help, believing that it would be too shameful to treat the Rock's battle intent that way. You have to be careful, Ryu. Beasts only have one drive, to evolve. Eating the spiritual root of a Thunder Rock descendant is probably the only chance those 5th and 6th order king beasts have at taking another step forward. Ryu's eyes narrowed. He knew he was too optimistic in thinking that he and the Rock weren't bothered because of some sort of chivalry. Those others were definitely waiting for the Rock to fall. This situation was far too different from the norm. The Rock had met Ryu's challenge head-on, but the reality was that if he wanted to run away, Ryu would have had no chance at catching him. This was likely what the other beasts had experienced as well. The rock was a juicy piece of meat that they could never lay their hands on because its speed was too quick. Now that the rock had tired itself out on its own, for reasons unknown to them, this was a perfect opportunity that they couldn't pass up, no matter what. "Can you bring him into the incubator?" Ryu asked. He simply didn't have enough spatial Kai control to bring in such a large beast. "No problem, but you need to form a connection with him first or else he'll be unable to." Ryu nodded. Stumbling his way forward, he finally made it to the rock's side. He could see the fiery intent within its almost childish-like expressions, but he didn't feel any malice as he placed his palm on the rock's large, silvery head. "From today on, you're with me. It won't be easy though, so if you're a coward, you can leave now." The rock made a sound that Ryu interpreted as a scoff. It was as though the rock was saying, "You dare to call me a coward, even after all of this? Don't make me eat you." Ryu smiled lightly, feeling a natural connection with the rock. He felt that they were one in the same, proud, unyielding men. The rock didn't see this as a master-slave contract. He only saw it as a relationship. If he one day felt it was no longer worth being by Ryu's side, he would leave. The rock turned illusory under Ailsa's guidance and soon disappeared into the incubator to recover. As for Ryu, he swung on a familiar black cloak and practically vanished from thin air. Grand ancestral bloodlines, the lurking king beasts of Flash Mountain, could only look around in confusion. They had simultaneously surged forward once the sounds of battle ended, but they found nothing in return. Unfortunately for them, with Ailsa by his side, and thanks to the immortal Kai provided by the first immortal plane, Ryu's cloak was far more effective than it had been on the higher mortal plane. Despite his injuries, Ryu continued to battle lesser fourth-order beasts, pushing his phoenix martial forms to their utmost limit. To him, if training wasn't painful, there was no point to it. Days later, Ryu stumbled into a cave located near the peak of Flash Mountain. It seemed he had completely forgotten about the month-long time frame given to him by the mercenary guild. Or maybe he simply didn't care. Ailsa shook her head, entering her true form to slowly massage Ryu's body. She didn't have much to work with in such a cold, wet, and harsh environment, but she did her best, taking control of the incubator. She nourished Ryu's body with vital tree essence as she pressed her slender fingers into his hardening muscles. The lanky Ryu of the past was nowhere to be seen any longer, and he had already recovered from the atrophy he experienced after slipping into a half-a-year-long coma. He finally filled out his frame, standing with the stature only a Tatsuya could have. Ailsa sighed. If it wasn't for the borderline godly regenerative abilities of Ryu's ice and fire phoenix bloodlines, not to mention the tenacious vitality of his lightning Qilin and fire dragon ones as well, his body would likely already be riddled with scars. "I don't understand how someone with such strong willpower can have such a weak mental realm. There must be a reason behind this." Ailsa never spoke to Ryu about her thoughts, and since Ryu usually refrained from reading her mind, likely to push down the guilt he felt using her like this, he didn't know about this. The truth was that strong willpower didn't always correlate to being talented within the mental realm. However, a strong mental realm guaranteed strong willpower. Simply put, being strong-willed didn't mean you were talented, but it did mean your mental realm was strong. Yet, despite being so strong-willed, even to the point of pushing himself to the brink of death, Ryu's mental realm was far below average. This wasn't the only oddity either. Despite being baptized by the origin rite and receiving help from the essence of the immortal path, Ryu was still subpar. To put things into context, an absolute genius of Ryu's mental realm would have a spiritual sense range and mental realm size of 1 kilometer upon entering the spiritual entrance realm. An average individual would have a range of about 100 meters upon entering, but Ryu had a range of less than 30 meters upon fully entering the spiritual entrance realm. And even after receiving 2 heaven-sourced helpers, he barely reached 60 meters. This wasn't just bad, it was horrible. to the point where it didn't make any sense. Ailsa couldn't help but think of Ryu's false spiritual foundation as she continued to massage his body. She had never heard of someone so talented being born with a false spiritual foundation. HMPH, Ailsa snorted. If someone dared to play tricks with my little Ryu, I'll make them pay. Ryu startled awake hours later, pushing himself up from the hard obsidian floors of the mountain. You should sleep some more, you still haven't fully recovered. Ryu shook his head. We should go. The striking weed should be nearby, right? Ailsa fell into silence, watching Ryu steadily rise to his feet. Have we collected enough lightning-type spiritual roots? Ryu asked offhandedly. We can't be sure until you absorb them, but it's likely not so easy to satiate an ancestral-grade bloodline. Ryu nodded. That made sense. Even if he was using the spiritual roots of beasts that had far higher cultivations than him, the grade of their bloodlines was too low in comparison to Ryu's. The Rock was the perfect example. He was only a peak third-order beast, yet because of his bloodline, he was the strongest beast Ryu had faced in this mountain range. You said you had a method to deal with the Zoo ancestors. Ryu leapt from the edge of the cave, gripping the slippery rock face above his head to propel himself forward. Ailsa's massage was truly too miraculous. He should have felt pain, but all he experienced was a good stretch. Yes, but it isn't quite necessary to do so just yet. They are located within the core text's floor, and we should be focused on improving your mental realm to its utmost limits within the spiritual entrance realm first, before we consider learning mental realm techniques. Unless you want to find out if the Zoo clan has any necromancy ancestors in their past. Ryu shook his head. I spent decades trying to find the Death Shrine. There's no one more familiar than me with Death Path-related ruins. Thanks to the Origin Flame, I can clearly remember hundreds, if not thousands of locations where famous necromancers of the past might have buried their legacies. I'm not too worried about finding them. Ailsa smiled. I almost forgot my little Ryu is a mighty origin-grade ruin master. The title of ruin master was even above herbologist in prestige. It was of such a high level that a small place like this outer ring wasn't worthy of having a ruin master branch for itself. It was no wonder Ailsa felt pride at Ryu's achievement. Ryu's lips slanted slightly, soon reaching the very stop of Flash Mountain. Well, more accurately, he had reached a place where the peak was in view. The peak itself was shrouded by a perpetual rain of lightning. The rumbling of thunder and the sound of rock shattering under the striking lightning could make even the bravest man's heart palpitate. Ryu's pupils could clearly see it. Striking weeds spread out as far as the eye could see. Ryu took a deep breath. How large must my mental realm be to be considered an absolute genius? Ailsa bit her lip. 1 kilometer at opening, but it must be 10 kilometers before entering the spiritual endowment realm. A tenacious light flashed in Ryu's eyes. 20 kilometers it is. Grand ancestral bloodlines, thunderbull horns, thunderhawk claws, lightning serpent gallbladder. Ailsa guided Ryu in slowly absorbing the lightning kai of these materials through the incubator. As expected of an origin-grade treasure, the process was incomparably smooth. What should have racked Ryu's body with pain actually felt like a refreshing time within a hot spring. Tribulation 9 Clouds was split into 10 stages, the first of which was further split into 3 portions of its own. The first, and Ryu's current stage, was entirely focused on non-tribulation lightning and the priming of the body for absorption of true tribulation lightning. Essentially, the pure lightning kai of these materials, as well as the lightning-dense peak of Flash Mountain, all fell within this first of 10 stages. Of course, there was a heavy component of comprehension that went with Tribulation 9 Clouds. But for Ryu, the wielder of the first-ranked heavenly pupils, the first stage posed no issue for him. He saw through its complexities with a single glance. The goal of the cultivator of this technique was to form his or her own tribulation clouds. This required the use of lightning kai to create lightning-dense formations within the body. If one wanted to use it for the body realm, you would have to form the first stage's formation at the base of your brainstem. If one wanted to use it for the Kai realm, you would have to form the lightning formations upon your spiritual foundation. And if one wanted to use it for their mental realm like Ryu, it would have to be formed within your spiritual sea. Of course, one's spiritual sea wouldn't be truly open until one entered the soul birth realm. So this process actually took place in the thin fog of spiritual Kai that would one day become Ryu's spiritual sea. Guide the lightning Kai into your mental realm. Don't lose your focus just because it's easy. It will soon be impossible to improve in this technique without taking in natural, unpurified lightning Kai. You need to take this opportunity to learn the process inside and out so that you can do while screaming in pain. Remember, this technique had degrees of completion attached to it. The more perfectly fused with your body the thunder formations are, the easier the next stages will become. These materials will be enough for you to form the first thunder formation of the first stage, but to form the latter two, we'll have to enter the lightning storm. At this point, Ailsa was only speaking as a method of ignoring her own nervousness. She knew that not only could Ryu's heavenly pupils see through the depths of mystery hidden within the thunder formations, but their cool Kai also helped him focus. It was just that she was worried about the future. The pure lightning gently wisped into Ryu's mental realm. Ryu took control of it with ease. On the one hand, the Kai was gentle to begin with thanks to the incubator, and on the other, his lightning affinity was frighteningly high thanks to his mother and grandpa Kunan. He quickly formed the formation, a complex, crackling magic circle imbued with countless complex symbols. It was hard to believe that this was just the first of 3 formations tied to the simplest of 10 stages. However, he wasn't quick to lay it down. As Ailsa had said, while normal cultivation techniques were marked by improvement in power or advancement in comprehension, the Tribulation 9 Clouds was focused on 2 things. The first was the degree of completion, how perfect was the drawn formation, and the second was the degree of fusion. How perfect was the fusion of said formation to the cultivator's body? For degree of completion, Ryu definitely received full marks. The formation he formed was without flaw and perfectly emulated the will of the technique's creator. However, degree of fusion was a bit more complex. If Ryu was using this technique for his Kai realm or his body realm, it would likely require forcefully etching the formation into the bones that protected his brainstem or into his spiritual foundation. However, Ryu was working with his mental realm, and currently, it was nothing but a fog of spiritual Kai. There wasn't exactly anything to anchor onto or etch into. Perfect fusion, huh? Ryu's eyes, hidden behind their lids, blazed with a thought. Ailsa, who was paying great attention to Ryu's thoughts, bit her lip. That would indeed result in a perfect fusion, but keep in mind how difficult doing such a thing will be while in pain. Ryu smiled lightly. If I don't go all out, there's no point. Ryu could already feel his mental realm expanding just the presence of the thunder formation. He hadn't even laid it down yet, but he had already gained almost 5 meters. After seeing how effective the technique was in aiding him, there was no need to hold back anymore. If one peered into Ryu's mental realm, they would see a beautiful sight. A fog of white gold slowly churned below a bright yellow formation of only a meter across. The yellow formation crackled with lightning, striking down occasionally upon the fog. But if one looked closely, it almost seemed as though the fog was happy to be treated this way as it expanded further and further outward. Suddenly, the fog surged upward and into the small yellow formation. In response, the formation greedily swallowed the fog, expanding outward from its 1-meter width faster and faster. Just now, Ryu had a thought. The essence of Tribulation 9 Clouds was to use lightning Kai to create other kiss. Due to the use of the technique then, there was an inherent connection between Ryu's spiritual Kai and the lightning Kai that formed his first thunder formation. So, what did he? Completely did away with his spiritual Kai fog and used the thunder formation itself as the foundation of his mental realm. The thunder formation crackled wildly as it expanded, striking outward with furious strokes of lightning against the outer edges of Ryu's mental realm. Barriers shattered and collapsed as Ryu continuously absorbed more lightning kai, unsatisfied with his already blinding speed. It was then that Ailsa spoke. "Ryu, you need an anchor. Quickly, visualize immortal Sakura." Ryu didn't doubt Ailsa's guidance. He acted immediately, visualizing a beautiful immortal Sakura. Unlike what he projected outward, the immortal Sakura that appeared within Ryu's mental realm was solid and lifelike. It filled one with a sense of security, as though it would remain standing even to the end of time itself. Its short trunk anchored to the thunder formation, protecting it under its large canopy. It was then that a magnificent change took place. Lightning surged upward, coursing through the immortal Sakura and up through its large looming branches. The crackling of a beautiful yellow complemented the transparent petals, evolving together. Even without fully saturating the first formation, Ryu's mental realm reached 200 meters. Grand ancestral bloodlines. Ryu observed the changes to his immortal Sakura. According to Eska, the true strength behind her technique was in its flexibility. The immortal Sakura could act as a sturdy foundation to be built upon, allowing those who used it to maneuver outward along countless paths. Thanks to Ailsa's guidance, Ryu had inadvertently stumbled along one of these paths, resulting in his immortal Sakura becoming acquainted with the lightning element. As things stood now, as long as Ryu meditated upon it, he could most certainly comprehend a lightning inheritance. However, he was hesitant to do so and ended up putting it off. One had to remember that not every inheritance was the same. What Ryu gained from the Tatsuya, saintly weapons, couldn't be matched by any normal glaive, spear, or halberd-wielding clan. In this same way, not every lightning inheritance was the same. For example, Ryu didn't comprehend any old wind inheritance. He specifically waited until he could understand his northern heavenly wind. In truth, the matters of becoming a wind heir weren't completely analogous. Back then, Ryu didn't want to rely on his own comprehension to create his own wind inheritance. But right now, Ryu had two seemingly outstanding paths before him. One was the inheritance of the tribulation 9 clouds, and the other was within his own lightning Qilin bloodline. Once one sets off on a path, it isn't so easy to deviate from it, which is why Ryu had been careful to be selective. If he wanted to fuse two paths, it wasn't impossible, but he needed a greater understanding of both beforehand. One only needed to see how slowly his dual-wielding path was progressing to see this. Under Ailsa's watchful eye, Ryu greedily absorbed the rest of the lightning treasures. To the outer ring, it's no doubt that each would be worth several million gold coins, but Ryu tore through them all as though they were nothing but cheap snacks. By the end of it all, Ryu's thunder formation had grown to 700 meters, and his immortal Sakura had curiously grown along with it. Well, its roots had. Ryu's mental realm had truly become a paradise. A sturdy, crackling yellow formation stood as its base, with an ancient tree's roots holding it in place. Even the immortal Sakura's transparent petals flashed with streaks of lightning occasionally. "Is it meant to be like this, Ailsa?" Ryu asked curiously after absorbing the last of the lightning kai. "My immortal Sakura, I mean. Is it supposed to perpetually stand within my mental realm?" Ailsa nodded. This is actually a fairly new discipline, which is likely why Eska didn't know anything about it. Though the masters of the mind were taboo in this realm, that doesn't mean they were taboo in others. Cultivation is constantly evolving and improving. Though many good things of the past have been forgotten, there are many new paths that have been forged as well. If you continually visualize in this way, keeping the image within your mind, projecting the image will become easier, and your mind will take on the characteristics of your visualization much quicker as well. But this is obviously something incredibly difficult to do. Luckily, you have the origin flame. As Ailsa guided Ryu, she didn't forget to prep him appropriately. Though priming his mental realm was important, awakening a larger portion of his lightning Qilin bloodline from slumber would greatly aid in the next steps as well. So, not long after Ryu completely absorbed the lightning treasures, he found himself undergoing the not-so-painless process of absorbing spiritual roots. It seemed Ailsa was serious about not allowing him to rely on the incubator for body realm cultivation. Ryu quickly circulated his phoenix heavenly body technique. Thanks to this technique, his absorption was far more efficient than it would be for others despite the burning of his blood vessels. And despite its name, Ryu could easily use it for his non-phoenix bloodlines as well. Ailsa turned out to be correct once again. Absorbing blood that matched the affinities of his bloodline made the process even more smooth, bringing out yet another reason for the speed of Ryu's cultivation. Still, this wasn't even the most poignant point. How many in the very first body realm could even dream of using fourth-order beasts to cultivate, even if they came from prestigious families and had people who could hunt for them? Could their bloodlines withstand such pressure? What Ryu was doing was the equivalent of an awakening realm expert, absorbing Kai from a spiritual severing realm expert. Of course, with his advantages came disadvantages, namely that his blood took far more than others to satiate, but was that really a disadvantage? All this meant was that Ryu could grow far more powerful before worrying about gathering treasures to open his body vessels. Ryu's bodily strength once more shot forward. For someone within the pulse-tempering realm like Ryu, they'd usually begin around 500 jin of strength and peak out at around 50,000 jin once their blood was completely satiated. Once one reached 50,000 jin, you could be considering a match for lower spiritual severing realm experts. But only after beginning to open your body vessels could you start matching higher experts. After opening them all, battling a divine vessel realm expert was possible. However, Ryu already had over 2,000 jin of strength after opening his pulses, and before he started cultivating upon Flash Mountain, he had reached 10,000 jin. Ryu had assumed that this meant that since he had 4 bloodlines, he received 4 times the strength of others, but he was greatly mistaken. He had simply underestimated his bloodlines too much. The value of 500 jin was for those with common grade blood. It was 600 for those with black grade, 700 for those with earth grade, 800 for those with heaven grade, 900 for those of the sovereign grade, and finally, 1,000 for those of the ancestral grade. The most poignant point was that these were just averages. There were always bloodlines that were more suited toward body cultivation than others. For example, Ryu's phoenix bloodline sat right at this 1,000 jin mark upon awakening, but his dragon and Qilin bloodline were double that. So why was Ryu at 2,000 jin upon awakening? It was purely because he was an anomaly, despite his bloodlines having such great individual strengths. Because they were in a single body, they couldn't react in the way they wanted, making Ryu's awakening strength lower than it should have been. Unfortunately, what Ailsa realized and what she informed Ryu of was that this didn't mean that Ryu's base strength should have been 6,000 jin, a full 12 times more than someone with common grade blood. After all, Ryu only had one body, and there was only so much blood he could have. In order to share his body, his bloodlines had to give up a little of their domineeringness. However, the number was still shocking. Ryu's base strength was 5,000 jin. The reason he couldn't see the end of his strength was because he would need to reach 500,000 jin to get there. This number was too astounding. Someone of common grade blood would only reach this after opening all 6 body vessels. Though Ryu still had a way to go, he had only just reached 60,000 jin. Grand ancestral bloodlines. Ryu stood, facing the sea of lightning. He felt his body brimming with power, but he found it quite incredulous at the same time. His senses told him that his lightning Qilin blood was only about 30% satiated at this point, but he had already surpassed the 50,000 jin mark by 10,000. What would happen when he homed in on his other 3 bloodlines? Ryu sighed, beginning to understand more and more about just what Ailsa meant when she painted him as a lucky son of heaven. What right did he have to complain about his lackluster mental realm when everything else about him seemed so heaven-defying. It's time. Ryu didn't allow himself even an inch of hesitation. The moment he stood from his seeking wood tub of blood and spiritual roots, placing them within his spatial ring, he surged forward. If one could see the peak of Flash Mountain, a place even its king beasts avoided, you would see the nonsensical scene of a young man streaking naked into a rain of lightning, covered from his chest to feet in thick, multicolored blood. Ailsa, who had wanted to stop Ryu, could only watch on with a helpless expression. She knew best that Ryu didn't allow her to speak for fear. He would give in to her and turn back. And soon it became clear why he would want to do exactly that. Ryu had only taken a single step into the rain of lightning when his body was suddenly struck by a two-finger thick crackling line of yellow lightning. His body was blasted into the ground. All the strength he had accumulated seemed completely useless in the face of this strike. It bore into his body, turning his porcelain skin into a bed of cracked burnt black. Ryu felt his face tear, not because of the lightning, but because his cheek slammed into the tough obsidian rock face of Flash Mountain. Memories suddenly flashed with Ryu's mind. His grandpa Kunan's boisterous laughter filled his ears as he struggled to crawl forward. It was as though his old man, with fluttering dark blue hair and an outrageous beard, was standing right before him. The Tribulation Shrine. It had once been controlled by the Kunan clan, Ryu's maternal clan. However, in Ryu's grandpa Kunan's lifetime, it fell out of their control. Aside from the matters surrounding Mistress Holy Wing and his bastard daughter, this was Saint Kunan's greatest humiliation. In truth, Ryu's grandfather tried more than once to gain the shrine's acknowledgement. Ryu's body was never powerful enough to witness it personally. If he went anywhere near an unrestrained shrine, his only path would have been death. But despite his first life having only lasted 1,000 years, a mere blink of an eye to experts on his parents' and grandparents' level, Ryu had witnessed the aftermath of his grandfather's attempts more than a half-dozen times. This number seemed small. 7 or 8 tries over the span of 1,000 years, from a certain point of view, could seem like far too few. However, there was a reason many saw Ryu's grandfather as a madman to take on the trials of the Tribulation Shrine so often. It was practically seeking death. Tribulation lightning. It wasn't something cultivators had to face. Ryu only heard faint rumors and read obscure texts about sky gods having to face one in order to reach their level. But other than that, cultivators had little contact with this phenomenon. Yet Ryu's grandfather weathered its rage, regardless of his accumulated injuries, time and time again, as though he was attempting to wash away some hidden humiliation. Another strike of lightning collided with Ryu's back, splitting his back into a shower of blood that quickly cauterized by the savage lightning. In truth, Ryu knew the reason his grandfather continually failed. Everyone assumed that the Tribulation Shrine was only about ferocious strikes of lightning, but if that was the case, it would be redundant. What reason would the Lightning Shrine have to exist if a greater Lightning Tribulation Shrine existed? No, it was more than that. Though Tribulation Lightning was a part of it, it was only a part. The true reason Ryu's grandfather never cleared this shrine's trial was due to his second humiliation. He constantly faced his inner heart demon, related to the daughter Mistress Holy Wing snatched from him. Ryu had such a deep respect for his grandfather for precisely this reason. He was willing to face such vicious attacks of the heart so often. Even after billions of years, he was unwilling to give up. He was a true man, a man willing to face anything. Whenever Ryu thought about how his grandfather's laughter would be just as bright whenever he returned from another failure, his eyes brimmed with a reddened rage. Holy Wing Clan. Ryu's roar was drowned out by continuous rumbling thunder, but the maddened glint in his eyes had returned. He forgot about his task. It was as though there was nothing more important than reaching Flash Mountain's true peak. Ailsa watched on with a worried expression. Because she could exist between reality and imaginary, the lightning couldn't touch her. But every strike of lightning that hit Ryu felt like it was hitting her. Still, watching Ryu's mental realm rapidly react, she knew that he wouldn't be willing to take a step back. This sort of cultivation speed, it could only be matched by someone prepared to take it to such drastic measures. With Ryu's mental realm talent, it would have taken decades to reach this level of growth. In the end, it would have resulted in him stalling at the immortal ring realm. But now, Ryu furiously formed his second thunder formation. Even under inhuman amounts of pain, the origin flame stayed true to its abilities. A perfect picture, without flaw, was projected from within it, giving the violent lightning no recourse but to listen to Ryu's demands. At the same time, Ryu's lightning Qilin blood boiled violently, as though enraged that such pitifully weak lightning was actually influencing it so much. As a result, though the lightning violently rampaged along Ryu's skin and shallow muscles, it became a docile child within his body. Thanks to his Kunan blood, Ryu's wounds, though painful, remained relatively superficial as he crawled toward the denser streaks of lightning. He had entered such a devilish state of cultivation that he hardly realized when the third thunder formation of the first of 10 stages formed. The 3 formations arranged themselves from smallest to largest, forming an inverted cone as they allowed the roots of the immortal Sakura to stabilize them. It was then that an abrupt change occurred. Ryu's immortal Sakura shone brightly, finally accumulating enough strength to evolve to its next stage. Grand ancestral bloodlines. Ryu's immortal Sakura vibrated. In the next moment, the transparent petals fell. The scene was just as beautiful as usual, but there was something different this time. The branches of the immortal Sakura shook with more vigor. Soon the change became apparent. Slowly, the transparent petals were replaced one after another. The blossoms they came from soon became pure white flowers, exuding a purity and untouchable beauty. If before, the falling petals seemed like falling snowflakes, now they embodied that image perfectly. The new white petals crackled with lightning just like their predecessors, but they were far sturdier. Ryu, even in his sorry state, could tell that it wasn't impossible for these petals to withstand the strike of a Kai refinement expert now. With a bit more maturity, blocking the attack of a spiritual severing realm expert wouldn't be impossible. According to Eska, immortal Sakura had 7 stages. The first stage was a sort of primer stage, while the remaining 6 were connected to the 6 mental realms. The primer stage was the translucent stage, representing the transparent petals that just fell from Ryu's immortal Sakura. This stage was the white stage, the stage that was officially tied to the spiritual entrance realm. The following stages were the cherry stage, the red stage, the violet stage, the purple-gold stage, and the gold stage. In truth, the white stage was meant to only be capable of blocking the attacks of pulse opening and Kai refinement realm experts. However, that only referred to the base abilities of the immortal Sakura. There were 2 main reasons Ryu's had such great potential, even though he only recently entered this stage. Firstly, his mental realm, which had been his weakest point, had suddenly grown past the level of even geniuses. Secondly, he had mutated the immortal Sakura by infusing lightning Kai into its being. Though Eska had said this was possible, she also mentioned that this was a very advanced technique that even she took a long time to master. For her, it wasn't until she reached the red stage that she perfectly fused a new element into her immortal Sakura, making it stronger. Tribulation, 9 clouds, and his origin flame to thank for luck. The reason infusing a new element was so difficult was because one needed to stabilize the visualization at the same time. But Ryu found this very easy thanks to his origin flame. On top of this, the Tribulation 9 clouds provided a unique opportunity to infuse his mental realm with lightning Kai. The most poignant point here was that Ryu used a continuous visualization within his mental realm, something which Eska, who was from ancient times, wasn't familiar with. Ryu snapped awake to find himself once more within a damp and hard-floored cave. He could vaguely remember dragging himself back out from under the barrage of lightning to come back here before completely collapsing. He had gone further than he thought, reaching the true peak of Flash Mountain, was a foolish dream for him who was so weak right now. That was a place even sixth-order king beasts didn't dare to venture. How could he make it there? But he had been able to form all three first-stage thunder formations. From Ryu's understanding, the forming of the formations was the actual difficult part. Once the formation was created, any form of lightning kai could be taken up. For example, it was impossible to create the next thunder formation with true tribulation lightning. However, once the formation was formed, Ryu could absorb regular lightning kai to grow it to its limits. Though, obviously, trying to satiate tribulation lightning with regular lightning was a tall task. When Ryu sent his thoughts toward his mental realm, he was ecstatic due to what he saw. His mental realm had actually expanded to 30 kilometers, and he had yet to fully satiate the third thunder formation. Of course, Ryu knew that it was only so easy to break his limits now, because the realm was so low. Once he began tackling greater realms, breaking the shackles that bound him would become even more difficult. But he couldn't help but be happy that there was a path forward. So you're finally awake. You're going to work Big Sis to death. Ailsa grumbled, but the expression on her face was actually quite happy. Ryu hadn't awoken for 3 days, and she practically exhausted herself trying to heal him appropriately. Ryu came to himself, hearing Ailsa's voice. How much time do we have left? For the 1-month time limit, there's still a little less than 3 weeks left. Good. I only need a day to finish them anyway. Let's continue. You can't mean. Ailsa couldn't even finish her grumbling before Ryu shot forward once more and into the sea of lightning. In the end, Ailsa couldn't bring herself to stop him. She knew the journey ahead was too grueling and too cruel. Ryu would soon learn why it was that fighting against one's own lack of talent was so difficult. Those true geniuses of the mental realm path Ryu was chasing after. Once they entered the spiritual endowment realm from the spiritual entrance realm, their mental realms would explode outward by 10 times, making their 10-kilometer limit stretch to 100 kilometers. However, once Ryu broke through, he wouldn't receive such good treatment, since he artificially increased his limits. Aside from an increase in spiritual kai quality and an improvement in his spiritual senses' ability to pick up fine details, his mental realm might even shrink instead of expand. Once the spiritual kai increases in quality, it will actually collapse in on itself, becoming thicker. This is the final step before the spiritual kai becomes your spiritual sea. Essentially, the fog that had once been in Ryu's mental realm would begin to thicken to nearly the point of becoming liquid. Others could offset this reduction by their mental realm's expansion, but Ryu wouldn't receive this. His mental realm might actually shrink by as much as half, if not more, by Ailsa's calculations. He had to work this hard. Ryu continuously charged further and further into the sea of lightning. Without a mind for himself, his only focus was on satiating his third thunder formation. 40 kilometers, 50, 60, 70. Ryu reached 100 kilometers by the end of the 3rd week. It was then he saw an opportunity, one to break into the spiritual endowment realm. He had so much more spiritual kai than one should have in this realm. So he followed his instincts and shattered open his spiritual vessel, only to witness the cruelty of reality. He could only watch as his mental realm rapidly shrunk before his eyes. Grand ancestral bloodlines, Ryu sighed. He wasn't too surprised by this sequence of events. Ailsa had made it clear that fighting against one's own lack of talent required a lifetime of effort. If he only had to go through this much to see lasting effects, even if not everyone would be willing, a large majority would. By then, almost everyone in existence would be a top-flight expert. Ailsa smiled encouragingly. It's better than I thought it would be. The tribulation 9 clouds definitely has some miraculous abilities. Even with the shrinkage, your mental realm size is still double that of an average talent. Ryu's mental realm had suddenly compressed back down from 100 kilometers to just 20, even worse than Ailsa expected. Since the average increase after entering the spiritual endowment realm was about 10 times, and an average starting began the spiritual entrance realm at around 100 meters and reached their limits at around a kilometer, Ailsa's calculations were fairly accurate. Still, it was painful to see all of his hard work flooded down the drain like this. What was more depressing was that Ryu had exhausted the first 3 thunder formations to their limits. This meant that if he wanted to push past his limits in this new realm, he would need to find a source of tribulation lightning, because the next 9 thunder formations couldn't be formed with normal lightning kai. Ryu stood amid the rain of lightning, looking toward the peak of Flash Mountain. Currently, this level of lightning could barely tickle him, but that was only because he stood at the outer edge. By Ryu's calculations, he had only ventured about 10% of the way to the eye of the lightning storm. Do you think there might be tribulation lightning further in? It's possible, but I would have to do some calculations to find out for sure. Either way, even if there is, your current self can't possibly make it there. It's better if I don't give you the temptation. Ryu smiled bitterly, certain that Ailsa saw him as a full masochist by now. He knew that Ailsa didn't have to go through so much trouble to find out the answer to his question, but she was feigning ignorance. Ailsa's feng shui comprehension should be greater than his own. While he would truly need tools and time to calculate, Ailsa should instinctually know. I guess I'll have to cultivate normally for now, until my body is strong enough. I can also consider letting you go after your immortal Sakura reach the cherry stage, but maintaining 2 visualizations, one for your mental realm and another for reality, will be difficult, so I'd prefer your body to be ready instead. So you're saying there is tribulation lightning? Ailsa turned her head away. I'm saying nothing of the sort. Hurry along now. I need to heal you and you have less than a week to complete the missions. Yes, Ryu mumbled. What was that? Yes, big sis. Ryu's face distorted, regretted his actions immensely. But at least Ailsa's silver bell-like giggling was pleasing to listen to. Asterisk asterisk to others, Ryu likely spent the past month pulling his hair out, trying to complete a bite that was far too large for him alone. But for Ryu, he spent the past month in pretty much a single location, then truly began to complete his missions with just 5 days remaining. Ryu's speed reached yet another level. With his strength having been brought to 60,000 jin, his body had obviously become far better at resisting wind pressure. However, Ryu didn't need to personally run anywhere, but he now had his own beast companion. Ailsa lovingly called the Thunder Rock descendant Little Rock. It turned out that the little guy wasn't even 3 years old yet, but he already possessed such immense strength. According to Ailsa, it was inappropriate to call the little guy a Thunder Rock. His bloodline was far too thin. His parents were actually normal Thunder Hawks, and a lucky series of events resulted in a repressed Thunder Rock gene presenting itself in Little Rock. Objectively speaking, he was a mutated Thunder Hawk. Maybe one day he would truly earn the right to be called a Thunder Rock. This aside, Little Rock's speed was just as fast as Ryu, with the benefit of being able to fly. Though Ryu could also fly, he required far more energy to do so than Little Rock did since he didn't have wings. One could only imagine how fast Little Rock would be after breaking into the Fourth Order. Ryu covered the whole of Valor City territory in just 3 days, completing all sorts of tasks. Some required finding rare herbs, while others even required killing outlaws. No matter what it was, Ryu completed it with ease. The only tasks that provided some resistance were those requiring the finding of a person. After all, you couldn't kill an outlaw unless you found them first. But Ryu's newly minted spiritual sense, not to mention his third perspective, made these matters far easier. It wasn't long before Ryu's journey led him back to the mercenary guild. Because he took 2 days off to heal, thanks to Ailsa's nagging, he only managed to return on the final day, only to find the mercenary guild bustling with enraged voices. "Steward, this is ridiculous. The boy isn't coming. Am I meant to watch my people starve?" A familiar red-haired man was losing his patience more and more. Fourth Order mercenary squads, due to the dangerous nature of their missions, would only take them on when they absolutely had to. The fact they had been delayed by a whole month obviously put many of them in the negative. It wasn't just him either. Over the last month, The only other fourth-order mercenary squad had come as well, only to be met by the same wall their colleagues had been. Two men, one red-haired and the other black, both burly and tall, stood infuriated. But though they vented their anger with their words, they didn't dare to step toward the receptionist, also known simply as the steward of the mercenary guild. Suddenly, the two men felt a streak of white brush by them. For a moment, they thought they smelt something intoxicating, a smell that made them feel endless comfort in their hearts. "I would like to hand in these missions," a plain voice sounded. Those within the bustling guild hall could only watch in shock as the deep black mission papers reserved for Fourth Order missions were brought out one after another. Grand ancestral bloodlines, Ryu was cut a sorry figure. He had already blown through all 10 robes he bought from Valor City. He hadn't seen any sort of luxury in a month, and the only thing protecting his decency was an already closed to worn-out ice silk flexible armor. In truth, Ryu was a bit depressed about this. He spent over 30 million gold coins on this flexible armor alone, so seeing it not even last him 2 months got to even him, the scion who had never wanted for anything in his lifetime. You would think a middle black-grade treasure would be more durable than this. Yet despite this, Ryu's white hair remained speckless, and his aura was far more piercing. The steward's eyes glowed with an odd light. "Can I see your proof of completion, please?" Ryu responded by bringing out 2 bushels of spiritual herbs, 2 severed heads, and 2 signed documents from satisfied clients. With each sweep of his spatial ring, it seemed the light in the steward's eyes only seemed to grow. The bustling mercenary guild fell into a silence. The steward's reception desk was accessible to all. The mercenary guild's entrance led right to his semicircular desk. To its back was a massive lobby area and a bar which scantily clad bartenders frequented. Funny enough, the bartenders, despite this description, were of both genders, handsome men and beautiful women alike. The mercenaries weren't as dominated by men as convention might make it seem. Still, this sort of open floor plan made nearly everything that could be found on the guild's first floor easily seen by the eyes of anyone who paid attention. So, when Ryu suddenly brought out proof of his completed Fourth Order missions, it was no wonder a silence fell over the guild. The steward went through the proofs one by one. 10 lower Kai stones, 15 lower Kai stones, 3 lower Kai stones, 5 lower Kai stones, 8 lower Kai stones, 12 lower Kai stones. Your total is 53 lower Kai stones. Hearing such a total, one could imagine the greed in the eyes of those in the surroundings. 53 lower Kai stones. There was 53 million gold coins. Even if they had to split that among their mercenary squads, it would be enough to live like kings and queens for decades. Usually, it would take their squads weeks to complete a single Fourth Order mission. Then, whatever payment they received would have to be split amongst a team that sometimes had upwards of 10 people. On top of that, they would have to allocate a set number of funds to handle the inevitable gruesome injuries they would receive and maintain the weapons that kept them employed. By the end of it all, they'd be lucky to walk away with 50 to 100,000 gold coins, and that was if they were squad leaders. Team members received even less. To a commoner, this number was grand number, but to them, in order to maintain their lavish lifestyles, support a few mistresses, and live a life of overall luxury, this number was too small. To see a single person take home hundreds of times their earnings in a single sitting, it filled them with an irrational, honestly comical rage. Could they have finished so many missions alone? No. If Ryu hadn't touched these missions, were they guaranteed to succeed? No. Had Ryu done this all on his own? Yes. But in their minds, the mercenary guild missions were their own. There were only 2 Fourth Order squads. When had they ever faced this sort of situation? Since they formed, they had had practically free reign over the missions. It wasn't that there weren't those more powerful than them. If this was the best the Outer Ring had to offer, wouldn't it be too pitiful? It was rather that those with power on the level of Ryu wouldn't ever use the mercenary guild. To many, the mercenary profession was looked down upon. They didn't have loyalties, so they couldn't accumulate faith unless they themselves became an undefeatable expert. But even then, individual faith rarely, if ever, matched clan and sect faith. As a result, the geniuses and true experts of the Outer Ring didn't use this establishment. As for how a guild seen in this way had a steward with so much prestige, maybe that was a secret for another time. Kid, if you know what's good for you. A flash suddenly passed by the red-haired man's shoulder. In the next instant, a cry of pain erupted from his lips. Pools of blood flooded the guild's floors. A man who was once tall and burly lay on the ground, clutching a shoulder stump that should have had an arm attached. Ryu wasn't a giving person. In the past, he tormented people with his words whenever they pissed him off. But in this lifetime, he had no need to do such things. He was willing to lay down his pride for the sake of his family. But when it came to no-name individuals, especially mere a lower spiritual severing realm experts who deemed to speak to him in such a way, he had no patience for it. No matter what, Ryu was a scion of the Tatsuya clan. His pride bore deep into his bones. Plus, he hadn't exactly had the coziest of last months. He spent almost 4 weeks being beaten down by lightning he couldn't retaliate against. It wasn't in him to let the slightest slight go right now. Youths are truly energetic. The steward clicked his tongue, but didn't seem to care about the red-haired man. You know, someone needs to clean that. Ryu slid back one of the lower Kai stones the steward had just given to him, taking the remaining 52 with him. He hadn't done this for the money to begin with. Leopold's wealth was thousands of times this, and it was all Ryu's now. He only had 2 real reasons for coming here. The first was faith for the awoken moon sect. Thanks to his pupils, he could feel the subtle changes in the badge that hung from his hip. The second was convenience. Since he needed to train anyway, these tasks were the perfect method. But he had been disappointed by how easy they were. The steward chuckled at Ryu's actions, but still kept the Kai stone. It's rare to have youngsters of your talent willing to cooperate with our mercenary guild, and a mighty throne at that. Who would have thought? I can provide you some extra opportunities. What do you think? As the guild was frozen by Ryu's actions and the steward's words, maybe only the 2 men in question noticed the entrance of a group of cloaked figures. Grand ancestral bloodlines, an opportunity. Ryu's gaze met the steward's, whose eyes shifted slightly to watch the new guests enter. Yes, an opportunity. The steward turned back to Ryu. You may have already picked up on some peculiarities of our mercenary guild. As a throne, you're in a unique position other geniuses are not. Ryu immediately understood what the steward meant. Mercenaries were looked down upon because it wasn't a conventional occupation of the martial world. Without loyalties or ties, they couldn't accumulate faith by normal means, and as such, were usually avoided by geniuses of Ryu's caliber, or even lesser geniuses as well. However, weren't thrones in the same boat. By being a throne, Ryu was in a unique position. He had already chosen the path of accumulating faith based on his own abilities, rather than relying on a clan or sect. As such, he was a prime candidate for the mercenary guild. And even more poignant than that, the steward's words seemed to imply he wouldn't be the first throne to take this path and join their guild. Do you know anything about this mercenary guild, xianxia? Ryu couldn't help but admit he was intrigued. xianxia shook her head. Matters related to current events are quite muddled for me. This answer surprised Ryu as well. Hadn't xianxia been looking for him for 900 million years? You would think that someone with such a task would be completely clued in to the happenings of the realm they were searching in. But maybe the fairies had their own unique methods. Then again, fairies couldn't exist in realms like this one without their life partner acting as an anchor. So maybe it made perfect sense that xianxia would know little about such things. Ryu nodded. I would be lying if I said I wasn't interested. The steward smiled. Looking now, Ryu realized that the steward was actually quite the handsome man. It was just that his presence seemed to so easily blend into the surroundings that it was too easy to overlook this. To make matters more curious, Ryu actually couldn't pinpoint his cultivation. Of course, this was only because Ryu wasn't actively using third perspective which could function regardless of cultivation. But this fact alone either meant that this man had a technique capable of hiding his cultivation, or he was so strong that Ryu's passive pupil abilities couldn't see through him. In the case the latter was true, he was a divine vessel realm expert at the bare minimum, and more likely stronger than even that. This outer ring is so odd. First, Blacksmith Ember is a hidden divine vessel expert, and now this steward. In a place where such power should be rare, why do they seemingly pop up everywhere? In order for you to take hold of this opportunity, I would usually need to test you, but thrones are an exception to this rule. Though the steward's voice trailed off, Ryu could tell what he wanted to say. Technically speaking, Ryu was the likely weakest of the thrones they had ever recruited. This wasn't because of his cultivation or age. It was rather because he was the throne of a mere fifth-order sect. Even the only two other thrones of this plane were the throne of core region sects and clans, which would make anyone assume Ryu was the weakest. How could the steward know that the truth was actually the opposite? Not only was Ryu a throne, he was technically one of a ninth-order sect, making him among the most powerful in terms of combat prowess thrones they had ever recruited. In truth, there were plenty of individuals hidden in the dark that knew the past of the Awoken Moon sect and as such, took Ryu far more seriously. But maybe this steward's position within the mercenary guild was too low to know this. Or why else would he be a manager in this mere outer ring? The steward read Ryu's expression. He could see the lofty arrogance in the young man's silver eyes, seemingly uncaring of the steward's blatant slight. This made the steward even more interested in this Ryu character. There was no shortage of arrogant geniuses, but one so arrogant that they cared nothing for the opinions of others was incredibly rare. It was at this moment that the cloaked figures reached the curved reception desk. They were unfeeling. Walking by the bloodied pool, the red-haired man still screamed in without a care in the world. "Throne Ryu, I presume." The voice that spoke came from a woman. It sounded like a gentle spring or the soft pitter-patter of light rain. However, Ryu didn't miss the commanding undertone. This woman was very much used controlling matters, in the palm of what must be her lovely hand. Interestingly enough, these cloaked figures didn't come for the steward. In fact, even the usually calm and aloof mercenary guild receptionist had a hint of caution in his deep black eyes. Ryu sent a glance toward the woman. He didn't like her tone, not even in the slightest, but he retracted his innate urge to lash out, tempering it down and cooling his reflexes. "You are." The woman giggled. It sounded so ominous that even the red-haired fourth-order mercenary squad leader didn't dare to continue to scream. Under the helping hand of his teammates, and holding his severed arm in another hand, he limped away. Asking a cloaked woman her name, isn't that a bit too silly? Ryu stared coldly at the shadows that covered her face for a long while. He was irritated beyond belief. This woman dared to ask him for his identity while blatantly disdaining to tell him hers. Without another word, Ryu turned to leave. He was aware that it was foolish to provoke someone who was very obviously so powerful. Seeing her entry, Ryu no longer hesitated to use his third perspective. From his understanding, this woman was in the immortal ring realm. Not just that, even the weakest of her subordinates were within the divine vessel realm, with a few even being in the connecting heaven realm. If Leopold, who drove Ryu to near death, met this group, his only option would be death. "Did I say that you could leave?" The woman giggled once more, but Ryu seemed to have not heard her, causing her eyes to flicker with disdain. "Edwin," she said plainly. In that instant, just as Ryu made it to the door, the large man took action, a pressure the likes of which could collapse a mountain bearing down on his back. There was no suspense. The fist collided with Ryu, sending him flying out of the guild, crashing through numerous buildings, and landing in a bloody heap. Grand ancestral bloodlines shock didn't just pervade the mercenary guild. It felt as though the whole of the circle of elites fell into an eerie silence. Though many didn't know exactly what happened, anyone bold enough to start a fight in the middle of Valor City wasn't to be trifled with. To make matters worse, their valiant city lord, who would have normally acted immediately, showed no signs of moving. City Lord Valor was a man who took no nonsense. Seeing the City Lord manor remain as silent as the partially crowded streets, many more intelligent people slowly backed away, completely unwilling to get involved. This wasn't a place where normal civilians gathered. It was the circle of elites for a reason. It was obvious why they didn't immediately react with stereotypical screaming and crying such destruction usually brought about. The front wall of the mercenary guild was completely destroyed. It looked as though someone had completed the building but forgot to mount up the fourth wall. At the same time, several buildings from the guild were in shambles. Several directly collapsed, likely resulting in some severe injuries and maybe even some deaths. Though most of those within the circle of elites were cultivators, not all of them would be invulnerable to such destruction. The gazes of the crowd shifted to the man who still had his hand in the air. A murky red, almost maroon aura coated his fists before it slowly faded away. He looked down on his hand as though he was dissatisfied with something. The steward's frown set in deeply. His words toward recruiting Ryu weren't hidden in the slightest. Wasn't it a slap to his face that these individuals killed him right in front of him? To make matters worse, Ryu's only crime was walking away. It was worth attacking a Kai refinement expert with the strength of a connecting heaven realm expert for something so insignificant. Did I ask you to kill him? The cloaked woman's voice was just as nonchalant and gentle as usual, but Irwin's large frame shook violently. CC calm. He tried to get his words out, but it seemed he had forgotten how to speak. The sound of gritting teeth sounded. In the next instant, something astonishing happened. The large cloaked man coated his palm in the odd red aura once more, chopping down on his own arm. A sick cracking sound reverberated through the silence, sending a shiver down the spine of those who watched. It felt as though the whole of Valor City didn't dare to breathe. Go and dig out his body before his soul completely dissipates, the cloaked woman said plainly. We need to see if he was the one we were looking for through his mental realm. And don't think that this will be the end of this. You'll have to answer to the others for this mistake. If thousands of years' worth of efforts go down the drain because of you, the consequences will be your own. The woman was absolutely certain that Ryu was dead. As an immortal ring expert, she had already opened her spiritual pulse and vessel before proceeding to the soul birth realm. She didn't sense Ryu's life force in the direction he should be in. Therefore, he could only be dead, a reality that made countless people sigh. A throne gone just like this. However, as the one-armed Edwin dug through the piles of debris, his strength easily allowing him to sift through several tons worth of brick, wood, and metal, it became increasingly peculiar the longer he spent. Several bodies were pulled out, some heavily injured and some already dead, but none of them were Ryu. After several minutes passed, the nonchalant cloaked female finally moved. Her aura blazed, sending a cycle of debris and bodies flying into the air. The destruction she caused in an instant was easily multiple times worse than anything Edwin had done. But to her surprise, even as her eyes darted around through the raining corpses, not a single was Ryu. In that moment, the female felt as though a spear of ice stabbed into her spine. The cold shiver was so severe that she froze, almost resulting in the root of a building crashing directly into her. Her head snapped toward a particular direction, a building far in the distance, but to her surprise, there was nothing there. However, the fear still lingered. An uncomfortable cold blanketed her soul. Never in her life had she ever this way. It will be okay, Ryu. Ailsa shook with rage worse than the victim himself. One day we'll kill her. Ryu didn't look away from the cloaked woman's gaze. Blood dripped from his back down his leg, as his gaze filled with endless will for slaughter pierced through her. He wanted to rip her pieces, even if it meant doing it with his bare hands, but he was well aware that he didn't have the strength to do so. If one saw the state of Ryu's back, they would be in complete shock that he was even breathing, let alone standing with the will to fight. The moment he met those cloaked figures, he knew that leaving would be a problem. So he purposely set up a situation where they would attack him. In that instant, he circulated his northern heavenly wind to his peak abilities, rushing forward with his greatest speed just as Edwin's fist collided with him. The result was the great mitigation of Edwin's blow, but even still, Ryu almost died. Taking advantage of the chaos, Ryu then wore his cloak and swallowed 2 silver vein petals to enter the breath of world meditation state, which was a step above breath of heaven. Thanks to the silver vein spirit seeking lilies, he could stay in breath of world now for just as long as he could usually stay in breath of earth, which was already several hours. In this state, even an immortal ring expert couldn't sense him. Ryu glared at the cloaked woman until she left, his rage still brewing. But in the end, he controlled himself. Using breath of world, he sensed the changes in his body and attempted to tap into his ice jade crystal body's healing factor. However, even with Ailsa's help, it wasn't easy to deal with injuries caused by a connecting heaven realm expert. Ryu only managed to barely keep himself together. He wouldn't be able to recover without several months of effort if things remained like this. Still, under the stunned eyes of the citizens of Valor City, Ryu did something that shocked them all. He simply couldn't swallow his rage, no matter how hard he tried. This was the only method he could think of to slap that woman's face, while he didn't have the strength to do so just yet. In broad daylight, not even an hour after those events, Ryu walked back into the mercenary guild as though nothing had happened. "I'd like to take you up on your offer," he said to the steward. Grand ancestral bloodlines. Ryu's reappearance was shocking, to say the least. Valor City's circle of elites was in shambles, but aside from the trouble to their fourth wall, the mercenary guild was relatively intact. In fact, many mercenaries were still gathered, excitedly speaking of the events that occurred barely a couple dozen minutes ago. It was under these circumstances Ryu reappeared. Not only was he obviously not dead, as many had expected after his body was nowhere to found, his condition actually seemed far better than when he first entered the guild earlier that day. Before, his clothes were ripped in several places. His hair, though still speckless, was unkempt, and even his flexible armor showed signs of withering away. However, the Ryu who appeared now took no attempt to hide his aura. His body seemed several times its actual size. Those here could see the rage boiling within his eyes. His back was so straight that it almost felt as though his feet were connected to the skies. His clothes were crisp and clean, drenched in a dark, endless black. His silver eyes pierced through the veil of space, forcing those who saw him to look away. Even the steward, who was currently facing the brunt of Ryu's rage, felt his heart palpitate uncontrollably. He seemed to remember his earlier doubts. Not only had he had them, he even subtly laid them out before this young man. What was he thinking? Ryu's eyebrow raised. "Can it be that your mercenary guild doesn't dare?" The steward, had it not been for his years of experience, would have blushed in shame. He was just speaking to Ryu about how many thrones they had taken under their wings. If he now backed away because of the actions of a mere immortal ring expert, wouldn't he be slapping himself in the face? He could see the clear disdain Ryu had for the cloaked woman. Could it be this young man really didn't put such an expert in his eyes? To those of the pedestal plane, and even to a large segment of the blossom plane, the immortal ring realm was a lofty god-like level they would never touch. But to Ryu, an immortal ring realm cultivator hadn't even been worthy to be his maid, let alone dare to raise a hand against him. There would come a day where he'd slaughter her. Even if he could kill her by underhanded means, he wouldn't do so. He wanted her to see the day she was helpless before him. To some, Ryu's rage was likely overboard. Even the half-step connecting Heaven Realm steward trembled under his unbridled aggression. But this was the person Ryu had always been, and was also the reason Ailsa felt he was still immature. Still, at the moment, Ailsa was even angrier than he was. "Our mercenary guild fears no one." After a moment, the steward recollected himself. His words weren't exactly true. However, the method the cloaked woman used to come here gave him plenty of leeway. Though he had a pretty good guess of who she was and where she came from, he could deny his knowledge due to her own attempts at secrecy. Objectively speaking, his organization truly wouldn't fear a single immortal ring expert. In addition, Even if she was from where he assumed, they wouldn't be able to completely ignore their guild's face either. Like this, both organizations would be able to work under a veneer of cordiality, allowing their normal operations to continue unhindered. The steward led Ryu up the stairs of the guild toward a back room. Thanks to its location, all of walls were completely intact, or maybe it was designed such that even such a large blast couldn't harm it. Those of Valor City will likely be unwilling to serve you any longer. The other major cities might soon receive news of this event, and likewise be unwilling. Maybe the enemies you should be most worried of aren't those cloaked individuals, but rather all of those ambitious individuals with nothing better to do with their time than to make things difficult for others. Seeing that Ryu didn't seem to care for his advice, the steward wrapped it up quickly and said nothing more. Though he was curious about how Ryu escaped such an ordeal, he didn't ask about this either. Their guild was built of loners. Though there were some squads, they were mostly concentrated in the lower echelons. Higher echelon squads also existed, but they were made up of 3 or 4 individuals max, usually only 2 actually. Simply put, he was used to dealing with people who liked to keep their own secrets. Our organization is split into 2 levels. What you see on the surface are split into orders. However, these individuals only have the right to receive layman missions. The true power of our guild lies in our stars. You have reached the minimum power requirement for a 1-star mercenary. 1-star mercenaries have the strength of spiritual severing realm experts, while our highest designation, the legendary 9-star mercenary, is reserved for those with the strength of sky gods. The steward scanned Ryu's reaction to this information, a hint of pride in his eyes, but he couldn't help but be shocked when he was met with the same deadpan gaze. "Why do you feel the need to have these 2 levels?" Ryu asked plainly. The issue here was obvious. It seemed like a hassle to have 2 different grading systems. What exactly was the point of having 2 spiritual severing realm tiers? 4th order mercenaries and 1-star mercenaries. It seemed like complexity for the sake of complexity. According to the steward's words, there were tougher missions for stars. But instead of having order missions and star missions, why not just grade star missions higher within the order missions ranking system and give them to higher-ranked order mercenaries? The steward nodded. This makes sense on the surface, but there are many purposes this system has. I'll give you an example. What if our guild receives a mission to a small realm where entry is restricted by cultivation realm? In that case, we'd need individuals with the highest battle prowess possible. Ryu suddenly understood. If this logic was taken, there were definitely many applications where this system would be useful, but he somehow felt that this was only a surface explanation. His instincts were telling him that there was an even deeper reason that even the steward wasn't aware of. As a steward, I have the right to award you a 1-star ranking, but if you want to progress, you will have to leave this outer ring. The steward opened a small black box hidden in a compartment of his dark office. Taking out a black ring, he solemnly handed it to Ryu, a small bit of concealed envy within his eyes. But he quickly regained his cool when he remembered that he would be rewarded for finding Ryu. "Take your time and refine this treasure. Only if you are worthy, as I think you are, will you succeed. If you fail to succeed within the allotted time, the ring would grind itself to dust." Grand ancestral bloodlines, it felt as though the whole of Valor City watched Ryu casually stroll out of the mercenary guild. His cold gaze swept over the destroyed guild front, a sneer coating his features. Considering the throbbing of his pupils, there were definitely several big-name characters eyeing him currently, with not a single clue that his third perspective had already sniffed them all out. Ryu directly walked the streets of the circle of elites, leaving along the main road and through the large gates. His back disappeared into the distant dense forest, and all traces of him completely vanished. Within the central mansion of Valor City, known as Valor Manor, a bronzed-skinned man sat in a well-decorated maroon office, facing a large glass expanse that looked out over the city. This man was none other than City Lord Valor, and considering the oppressive aura that seemed to multiply gravity several times over, he wasn't in the best of moods. He had half a mind to swoop down from his perch and bend Ryu over his knee. Did this child never receive a spanking in his youth? How could he be so brazen? This obviously wasn't what pissed the city lord off. In fact, he quite liked Ryu's actions. They reminded him of a younger him who was far less of a coward. If the youthful Saladin Valor saw his older self now, he'd probably spit on the ground and curse him to the high heavens. But the older Saladin Valor had too much to lose. Maybe this was a rite of passage that happened to everyone. Or maybe that was just an excuse he told to make himself feel better. By Valor City law, those cloaked figures should be executed. Their actions led to the deaths of dozens of innocent individuals. Yet this pathetic older self of his actually had the fleeting thought of capturing Ryu instead. He was so disgusted by his own thoughts that he nearly vomited. He knew he would be blamed for what happened today. Ryu's actions blatantly slapped the faces of those cloaked figures. His inaction would be seen as taking a side by those shameless bastards, despite the fact he had allowed them to do as they pleased as well. Saladin closed his eyes, his rich brown beard suddenly graying in an instant. In a war between kings, it was the commoners that suffered the most. When Ryu returned to his ice cave within Awoken Moon Sect territory, he collapsed into a bloody heap. All of the pent-up rage and adrenaline that had kept him standing seemed to dissipate, causing xianxia to rush into her full form to tend to him, unshed tears in her eyes. Since the enemies of the Awoken Moon Sect hadn't dared to finish them off in all this time, and constantly chose to use roundabout methods, Ryu felt that this was actually the safest place, despite everyone being aware that he was their throne. And maybe, considering he stealthily entered the sect, no one would think that he'd come here to begin with. xianxia worked tirelessly. Now that her intimacy with Ryu had deepened by a stage, she could remain in her true form for half an hour a day and use her cultist martial art more effectively. Natural energy formed an organic formation. xianxia's healing abilities worked differently than those of Fisher fairies. The reason she couldn't heal Ryu in battle was because she needed preparation time and a stable environment. Cultist fairies were more in tune with the natural order than even other fairies. It allowed them a great understanding of the natural flow of energy, which was where their knowledge of nurturing stemmed from. The cultist martial arts took control of the natural flow of energy, using them to promote a myriad of results. Currently, xianxia could only use it to provide a great boost to healing and recovery. But there were many other applications she would have to wait for Ryu to grow stronger to execute. Still, right now, she wanted nothing more than to heal Ryu. Weeks ticked by before Ryu was finally able to stay awake under his own power. Ryu had experienced what it felt like to sustain injuries from those a higher grade of strength than before. Objectively speaking, this injury was even worse than the ones he sustained being chased by Leopold. It was clear from this that xianxia's healing abilities were truly top-notch. In fact, from his understanding, xianxia was actually heavily handicapped, not just by his own strength, but also because of their current environment. The cultist martial art required a balance of energy. This required both the yin and yang of every major element to reach a delicate equilibrium. Because the Awoken Moon Sect was so heavily yin and water, it was difficult for xianxia to form the necessary balance here. A less extreme area would have definitely been more effective. But there was nothing they could do about this being the safest place. Seeing the small xianxia slumbering on his chest, Ryu felt an inexplicable warmth despite the cold environment. He would be lying if he said that he didn't find it silly that xianxia was doing so much for him simply because fate chose him as her life partner. But that didn't mean she wasn't growing on him. It was impossible to push away someone whose actions were so sincere. A slight pain took hold of Ryu's back as he slowly pushed himself up, cupping xianxia's small body in his hand so as not to wake her up. It seemed he wasn't fully healed yet, but that couldn't be helped. He laid the sleeping xianxia on his thigh as he entered a state of meditation. After adjusting himself, his gaze landed on the black ring on his finger, I just have to refine this treasure. Ryu remembered the steward's words. The test to become a star mercenary was refining this ring. If he couldn't do so quickly enough, the ring would self-destruct. The difficulty was directly decided by the cultivation of the one attempting, with the lowest threshold being for spiritual severing realm experts, meaning despite the fact Ryu was a realm lower, the difficulty wouldn't decrease any further. But Ryu wasn't worried. Refining a treasure could be done in two ways. One was with Kai and the other with spiritual Kai. When Ryu took the spatial rings of the elders of the natural order sect, they had been protected with spiritual Kai, same with the glove of order. This was because refining a treasure with one's Kai realm made it more difficult to establish a connection than if done with one's mental realm. Still, in maybe an interesting bit of irony, Ryu didn't choose to use his far more talented Kai realm. He would be given the 1-star test, but his mental realm was on the level of a 2-star. Without hesitating, Ryu's spiritual Kai poured out like a sea of lightning. In the next instant, a whole new world was opened within his mind. Grand ancestral bloodlines. Ryu was stunned by what he saw around him. He had just been within a minimalistically decorated ice cave, but now he had so suddenly been warped into a world of gentle white fog. Oddly enough, it didn't feel frustrating that he couldn't see more than a single meter in front of himself, but rather felt comfortable. The feeling was so out of bounds from what Ryu thought he should be experiencing that it ironically made him more on edge. It felt as though someone was manipulating him. It was only after Ryu calmed himself that he realized that it wasn't his body that was sent into this space, but his mind. This ring, it had an eerily similar function to the Zhu clan's crystalline jade. Congratulations on achieving 1-star status, and welcome to the dream world Osiris. Your invitation will be credited to 5th Order Steward Oramus Bijan. The gentle voice of what sounded like an amiable old man rang in Ryu's ears. He could immediately tell that this was a message written into a complex formation matrix. There wasn't actually another human here. Rather, the formation would simulate the consciousness of a human and the voice of one, using information fed to it by its creator as a foundation. Ryu's frown deepened. He didn't like this situation one bit. Osiris is the hidden meeting place of star mercenaries. Some people call this place a dream world, others a matrix world, and still others call it a mind hive. In this place, you can receive and be accredited for missions. You can be alerted when missions appear in your general area, and you can connect with fellow star mercenaries of your and other realms to a normal individual. This sounds great, convenient even. But to Ryu, the more he heard, the worse his mood became. The Zhu clan crystalline jade was a closed space. Only Ryu could enter and exit it. Even the ancestors within could only stay put. But this place was very clearly an open world. What did this mean? It meant that Ryu's mind, under the behest of someone else's machinations, was being projected into this dream world. This process necessitated a perfect understanding of Ryu's body and, more importantly, his secrets. When this was understood, it became perfectly clear why Ryu began to feel more and more uncomfortable within this gentle atmosphere. He felt that he should turn tail and run at his fastest speed in the opposite direction. The skill required to build such a world was beyond his imagining. When he thought of Steward Oramus' gloating expression when he mentioned 9-star sky gods, his heart sank even further. To make matters worse, the automated voice mentioned multiple realms, meaning this organization was bigger than even Ryu anticipated. The truth was that Ryu was aware of there being multiple realms long ago. Realms were so numerous that they could be considered to be near infinite. Generally, realms were split into numerous tiers and grading systems. A realm like Ryu's, who had birthed many sky gods in its history and had 3 immortal rank planes, was already near the top, which was why Ryu didn't particularly give much thought to other planes. There was no need for him to do so. There wasn't much of a difference between his world and the topmost anyway. But although they were ranked near the top, that didn't mean they were the top. And it also didn't mean that there weren't numerous realms that matched them in power. For the current Ryu, traveling across realms was difficult, but for characters on this level, would they be lacking in funds like Ryu would be? Forced to wait 2 years for an optimal time. In addition, didn't that voice say that he would automatically receive notifications for missions near his region? So didn't that mean this ring doubled as a tracker? Everything seemed to be going from bad to worse. Without hesitation, Ryu projected his mind back to his body, wanting to leave. He would revisit the possibility of this path once he was more powerful, but for now, it was foolish. One only needed to remember how the Zhu ancestors knew every one of Ryu's secrets, even down to his heavenly pupils, after he opened his mind up to their crystalline jade, to know how dangerous this place was. But maybe Ryu should have anticipated that his attempt wouldn't be so easily realized. Please do not attempt to leave. This process is highly dangerous. It is very possible for your mind to be permanently disconnected from your body. Ryu nearly spit on the ground, grinding his teeth toward the shamelessness of this world's creator. He or she spun this matter as though they were worrying for his own safety, when it was obvious to anyone with half a brain that even they knew no one would willingly submit themselves to such scrutiny. Osiris is 100% committed to protecting the privacy of our mercenaries. It was created by a union of sky gods, and none of them can access the information stored within my system without the consent of an 80% majority. Ryu snorted in his mind. The fact it could happen at all was enough for him to avoid the possibility in its entirety. In addition, the martial world was a place where the strong ruled and regulations were for the weak. It would be too naive of Ryu to believe the system's words. Osiris will now begin a screening. Ryu's expression turned grave, immediately thinking of numerous countermeasures. Cultivation detected, points given for battle prowess. Skeletal grade detected, points given for talent. Ancestral bloodline detected. Ancestral bloodline detected. Ancestral bloodline detected. Ancestral bloodline detected, points given for talent. Ancestral meridians detected, points given for talent. False spiritual foundation detected, points deducted for talent. Mental realm analysis complete, points deducted for talent. Ryu's eyes widened. Suddenly, a faint excitement overcame him. Sky gods weren't able to detect his spiritual foundation, because it was protected by the Phoenix Sky God. If this was true and the system was automated, this meant that his talent, as seen by the sum of its parts, would be calculated as trash by the system. And it didn't seem to notice his heavenly pupils. Was that because of Ailsa? Or, either way, it was fantastic. Calculations complete talent designation, subcommon battle prowess designation. Black, please choose which Sky God's faction you would like to enter. If you are rejected, you will enter as a factionless and have an opportunity to join one of the lesser factions later on. Ryu suddenly understood what the point of all of this was. Osiris was split into numerous factions headed by Sky Gods. These were obviously busy individuals. They didn't have the time to approve every single talent they took under their wings, so they allowed the system to do it for them. Within a certain threshold they would accept. If you were below this threshold, you would be rejected. With Ryu's evaluation, there was no way any Sky God would accept him. So he planned on not choosing at all and simply entering as a factionless, as the system called it. But he was immediately stunned by the list of names that appeared before him. It wasn't because of who they were, but the sheer number of them. If he counted correctly, there were 13 Sky Gods, all part of this one organization. Ryu was absolutely stunned. He forced himself to calm down. This was only more reason to turn tail and run. After he left, he would place the ring into his pupil's inner world where no one could detect it. It was then that Ryu suddenly froze. Even with his level of control, he almost irresistibly felt his eyes water. The name he saw shook him so fiercely that his hand uncontrollably had already swept forward before his mind could say no, right toward the only name with a 0 by its side. Faction chosen. Evaluation pending. Congratulations, you have been accepted into the faction of the saintly weapon Sky God Primus Tatsuya.